The woods were supposed to be my escape. I wanted to get away from the city noise, the endless chatter, and the constant rush. I planned this camping trip for weeks. Alone, just me, my tent, and the wilderness. I chose a spot deep in the forest, far from the busy trails. The maps showed an old clearing, surrounded by thick trees. No roads close by, no other campers for miles. Felt perfect. The first day was quiet. I set up my tent near a small stream where the water ran clear and cold. The air smelled fresh, full of pine and damp earth. Birds sang far above in the branches, and the wind moved the leaves gently. I collected wood for a fire, arranged my gear, and started a small campfire as the sun slipped behind the hills. The fire crackled, throwing shadows on the trees, making the forest look alive with movement. The warmth was comforting after the cool day. I cooked some canned beans and ate slowly while watching the flames. When the fire died down, I rolled into my sleeping bag, listening to the night sounds. The occasional snap of a twig, the rustle of small animals in the brush, the distant hoot of an owl. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was peaceful. I felt free, but the peace didn't last. Around midnight, something changed. I woke up to a soft crunching sound outside my tent. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer. The noise was slow, steady, like someone stepping carefully but with purpose. The sound circled my tent once, then stopped. My heart sped up, but I told myself it was just an animal. I stayed still, trying to calm down. Then, after a few minutes, the crunching started again, this time closer. It was as if someone or something was walking right outside the tent, moving slowly from one side to the other. The sound of footsteps on dried leaves and small sticks was unmistakable. I didn't have a flashlight near me. I didn't want to risk opening the tent flap. I pulled the sleeping bag tighter around me, trying to slow my breathing. The footsteps stayed there for what felt like forever, but when I finally dared to look out, no one was there. The next morning, I packed up quickly. The sun was barely up, and my nerves were raw. On the way back to the stream to get water, I noticed footprints in the soft earth. Big, heavy prints that looked like boots. They circled my tent, stopping right at the entrance, then disappeared into the trees. I hadn't seen or heard anyone else come into the clearing, and there was no road nearby. I told myself it must be a hunter or a hiker who had passed by earlier, but something about the prints didn't sit right. They were too large, too deliberate, and the fact they showed up only after dark made me uneasy. I wanted to leave, but my car was a good 2 miles away, and the path was rough. I had to stay at least one more night. That afternoon, I tried to keep busy, exploring the nearby woods. I found animal tracks, deer, rabbits, maybe a fox, but nothing that looked human. When I returned to camp, I found another set of footprints. This time, they led from the edge of the woods right to my fire pit, as if someone had been sitting there. I stared at the prints, heart pounding. No footprints led away from the fire pit. It was like whoever made them vanished into thin air. I set extra traps and tried to make noise, banging sticks together, trying to scare anything away. The sun went down, and the forest turned dark again. I lit my fire carefully, watching for any movement. At about 10 o'clock, I heard it again. The slow crunching of footsteps just outside my tent. This time, the sound was heavier, closer. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel eyes watching me. I stayed still, my muscles tight, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps circled again, closer and closer until I felt the ground shake slightly with each step. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped just at the edge of the tent flap. I heard a slow drag on the ground, like something heavy being pulled across dirt. Then silence. My mind raced. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen. After what felt like minutes, the noise stopped, and I heard a faint whistle, low and almost human. The next morning, I packed everything up as fast as I could. I took no chances. But before I left, I saw something chilling near the base of a tree. There was a small pile of sticks, arranged in a crude pattern, almost like a sign. I didn't recognize it, but it looked deliberate, like a warning. I followed the path back, trying to keep calm, but my eyes kept scanning the woods. Every shadow seemed to hide something. When I finally reached my car, relief flooded me. I locked the doors and started the engine. Driving away, I looked back at the trees, the forest dark and quiet. No sign of anyone, but I knew they were there. Someone had been watching me the entire time. Someone who knew how to move without being seen, who could get close without making a sound. I never found out exactly who or what it was. Maybe it was a hunter who didn't want me there, or someone else living off the grid, wary of strangers. I thought about calling the police, but without proof or any damage done, what could I say? Footprints and strange noises? That trip taught me something real. The forest isn't just a place of peace and nature. It can be home to people or things you don't want to meet. They know the woods better than you, and they don't always want you around. I don't camp alone anymore. I don't go deep into the woods where the trails end. And if I hear footsteps outside my tent at night, I'm not staying quiet. Because sometimes, the scariest thing isn't a ghost or a monster. It's knowing someone could be out there, watching, waiting, and you don't even know their name. I began that trip thinking it would be just another quiet weekend alone in the woods, something to clear my head after weeks of feeling stuck. I drove out to a place I hadn't camped before, a stretch of forest that didn't show up much online except for a few vague notes about rough trails and old logging roads. I liked that. Fewer people meant more silence, and silence was the only thing I wanted. The trail I followed was narrow and overgrown, the kind that hadn't seen regular use in years. The dirt was soft and uneven under my boots, covered in old leaves that had turned almost black with age. Every step felt like I was sinking into the woods a little deeper, like the forest was slowly swallowing the path behind me. I kept thinking I should mark the trees with something, but I didn't want to make it feel like I was scared. I wanted to believe I was just exploring. I told myself I would remember the way back. By late afternoon, I reached a small clearing where the tree line dipped around a shallow slope. The ground was almost level, just firm enough to pitch my tent. There were signs of old fire rings scattered around the edges of the clearing, half filled with dirt and moss, probably left by people decades ago. The air smelled thick and earthy, like damp bark and old rain trapped between the trees. I set up my tent slowly, taking extra care to make everything clean and organized. I always did that when I camped alone. Something about neatness made me feel safer. When the sun dropped, the temperature fell with it. The woods around me grew darker faster than I expected, the shadows becoming heavy and stretched out across the ground. I ate a simple dinner and tried to relax, but I kept noticing how quiet everything was. I'd been deep in forests before, but this place felt different. The silence wasn't peaceful. It felt like everything living had taken a step back and was waiting for something. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. That night, after I crawled into my sleeping bag, I lay awake longer than usual. The darkness outside my tent felt thick, like a blanket pressed around the thin fabric walls. My ears kept picking up faint things, twigs settling, leaves moving, but they were soft and spaced out, almost too controlled. I tried to tell myself it was nothing unusual, but it didn't sit right. Sometime after midnight, I heard a single slow step in the clearing. Just one. The kind where the weight settles into the dirt, not the light sound of an animal. It had a heaviness to it, something that felt deliberate. I froze completely, barely breathing. There was no follow-up noise, no crackling of leaves or shifting weight. Just stillness, like whatever made that step was now standing completely motionless. I stayed awake until the sky started turning gray. In the morning, I crawled out of the tent and checked the ground. The leaves around the clearing were disturbed in places, but not enough to see a clear footprint. Still, I felt like I wasn't imagining things. Something or someone had stopped near my camp, and they had taken just enough care not to leave much evidence. I should have packed up then, but I didn't. I told myself I was just tired from a bad night of sleep. I forced myself to continue with the day like nothing was wrong. I walked around the nearby area, followed a dry bend of a stream, and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling sitting in my stomach. But as the day passed, the sense of being watched kept creeping back. When I stood still, I would see small movements far back in the trees. just enough to draw my eyes, never enough to identify anything. By late afternoon, I went back to camp, planning to leave at sunrise. I made the area neat again, tied my food bag higher than usual, and kept my pocket knife closer than normal, even though I knew it wouldn't do much if something serious happened. As night approached, the air grew heavier than the night before. I could feel a pressure settling in the clearing, like the woods were closing in slowly. When darkness finally took over, the forest somehow became even quieter than before. I lay inside my tent, fully awake, my heartbeat pushing against my ribs. Hours passed, and then I heard it again. Another step, slow and heavy, from the same direction as the night before. This time, it was followed by another one. Not fast, not threatening in speed, but steady, getting closer to the tent. The ground shifted softly with each movement. Whoever it was wasn't trying to rush or hide. They were just moving with a slow, unsettling confidence. I didn't move. I kept my breathing shallow, trying to make it sound like I was asleep. The steps stopped only a few feet from the tent. I could feel the presence of whoever stood there. The pressure in the air changed, like someone was leaning close without touching anything. The tent fabric didn't rustle. No lights, no sounds of hands or tools. Just breathing, slow, steady breathing that wasn't mine. It stayed there for minutes that felt like hours. Then the breathing stopped, and I heard the softest retreating footsteps, each one fading deeper into the woods until the forest went silent again. I didn't sleep at all. When the sky finally began to lighten, I packed my things as fast as my shaking hands allowed. I didn't bother making breakfast or checking the area again. I just threw everything into my bag, tore down the tent, and got out. The trail back felt different than when I came in. The trees felt tighter, as if they leaned a little closer to the path. Several times I thought I heard something pacing just out of sight, keeping speed with me, but I refused to look. When I finally reached my car, I felt this sharp wave of relief, like stepping out of cold water after being submerged for too long. I drove off without taking one last look at the tree line. I didn't want to see if anyone was standing there. For days afterward, I kept thinking about those footsteps and the slow breathing outside my tent. There were no fairy tales or strange creatures involved. It was just a real person walking through the woods at night, close enough to touch the thin fabric between us. Someone who never spoke, never rushed, never tried to hide, but also never revealed what they wanted. That quiet, patient presence was worse than anything supernatural because it had no shape, no explanation, no story to fill the gaps. Sometimes at night, when I'm lying alone in my room, I think about how easily that tent could have opened, how nothing was stopping whoever stood there from doing anything they wanted. I think about the way they moved, slow, calm, controlled. I think about how they walked away without a sound, as if I didn't matter at all to them, or as if they were simply saving something for later. I haven't gone camping since. The gear sits packed in my closet, still smelling faintly like that damp clearing. Every now and then, I catch myself imagining those same slow steps coming toward me again, even when I'm safe inside my home. And every time, I realize the same thing. Whatever was out there wasn't confused or lost. It knew exactly where I was. It knew how to get that close without being seen. And the woods were quiet that night not because nothing was moving, but because everything else knew to stay still when that person was around. I left the forest, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I think it never will. The night I spent in those woods is something I'll never forget. I still get chills thinking about it, even years later. It wasn't the kind of fear that comes from some ghost story or made-up monster. No, it was raw, real, and bone-deep. The kind of fear that happens when something very human, very alive, is out there, and you're completely alone. It all started with a simple plan. I wanted to get away from everything, from the noise of the city and the constant pressure of work. I grabbed my backpack, some food, water, and basic camping gear, and drove out to a forest a few hours away. The place was remote, barely marked on any map, but it looked perfect. Tall trees, thick underbrush, and a small creek running through it. I wanted to camp near that creek, I arrived late afternoon and spent the next hour walking deeper into the forest. The air smelled fresh, pine and damp earth mixing together. Birds chirped lazily, and the sun filtered through the leaves, casting long shadows. I picked a spot near the creek, flat enough for my tent, and started setting up. The sounds of the water running over rocks were calming, and for a while, I felt at peace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I lit a small campfire. The crackling flames were warm against the growing chill. I ate some of my food, just simple stuff like a sandwich and some nuts, and then sat back, watching the stars start to appear in the darkening sky. But then, as the fire flickered, I noticed something strange. The forest wasn't as quiet as I thought. There was a low rustling from the bushes nearby. At first, I thought it was just a small animal, maybe a raccoon or a fox. I didn't think much of it until I heard the sound again, closer this time. Something was moving slowly but deliberately just beyond the firelight. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the noise, but I didn't see anything, just dark shapes and leaves moving. I told myself it was nothing, probably a deer or something. I tried to ignore it and focused on keeping the fire alive. But the rustling didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. It wasn't the quick, nervous scurry of a small animal. It was slow, careful, like something was watching me and trying not to be seen. I froze. My heart started pounding. The forest suddenly felt huge and empty at the same time, like I was the only living thing out there. Then I heard it. A low sound, almost like a growl, but it wasn't an animal growl. It was rougher, deeper, more human-like. It wasn't coming from one spot, but all around me, mixed with the rustling. I realized I wasn't alone. Something was out there with me. I grabbed my pocket knife, the only thing I had for protection, and stood up, shining the flashlight in all directions. The beam caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting behind a tree. Whatever it wasn't an animal. The size and speed didn't fit any wild creature I knew from the area. It felt like someone or something was stalking me. Panic started to set in. I knew I had to leave, but the thought of walking out there in the dark with something unknown around was terrifying. I tried to stay calm and packed up my tent quickly, my hands shaking. I didn't want to run, knowing that would give away my position, but I needed to get out of there fast. I decided to follow the creek upstream, hoping it would lead me back to the road. The water made a steady noise, something I could use to guide myself in the dark. I kept my flashlight pointed forward, scanning for any sign of movement. Then I heard footsteps, heavy, slow steps on dry leaves. They weren't mine. They were behind me, matching my pace but not quite close enough to see. I didn't dare look back. My breath came out in short gasps. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but I forced myself to keep moving steadily. The footsteps kept following me for what felt like hours, though it could have only been minutes. The forest seemed to close in tighter, the trees blocking out the moonlight, the underbrush snagging at my clothes and scratching my skin. Suddenly, I tripped over a root and fell hard on the ground. Pain shot through my knee, sharp and burning. The flashlight flew from my hand and landed a few feet away, casting a dim circle of light. That's when I heard it clear breathing. Heavy, rough breathing right next to me. I scrambled backward, trying to grab the flashlight, and finally managed to catch it. I swung the light wildly toward the sound, and for a split second, I saw a man. He was tall, wearing dirty clothes, his face grim and covered with dirt and scratches. His eyes were wild, desperate. No words, no explanation, just watching me. I didn't hesitate. I got up and ran as fast as I could, stumbling through the forest, following the creek. I didn't look back once. I ran until I burst out of the trees onto a dirt road, breathless and bleeding from scraped knees and hands. I didn't stop until I found a passing car, flagged it down, and told them to call the police. The officers said they'd searched the forest but never found anyone. They told me there was a man living rough in those woods, someone who avoided people and could be dangerous. They called him a drifter, a man who'd been missing from the nearby town for weeks. I realized then I had stumbled into his territory, and he had probably been watching me for a while before I even noticed. That night taught me something about fear, real fear. It isn't about monsters or ghosts. It's about the real, living dangers out there. A man lost in the woods can be far scarier than any story. And when you're alone, surrounded by trees and darkness, the line between safety and danger can break in an instant. I never went camping alone after that. I never went back to that forest. It was a harsh reminder that nature isn't always peaceful and that sometimes the scariest things are the ones with flesh and blood. I never planned to camp alone that weekend. It just happened because everyone else backed out at the last minute, and I didn't want to waste the 2 days I had already set aside. I chose a quiet patch of forest about 3 hours from home, a place I had only been to once before but remembered as almost completely empty. I wanted peace, a break from noise, and a chance to reset my mind, which had been crowded with stress for weeks. I told myself it would be safe and calm, and I tried to believe that as I drove deeper into the trees. The dirt road leading to the old trail was rougher than I remembered. The car shook over every bump, and dry branches scraped the sides as if the forest wanted to warn me before I even stepped out. By the time I parked near the start of the path, the sun was dropping lower than I expected. I hurried to get my pack, tightening the straps and adjusting the weight so it wouldn't dig into my shoulders. The air was warm but still, and the woods had that quiet heaviness that made every small sound feel bigger. As I walked, the trail narrowed faster than I thought it would. The trees grew tighter, and the ground felt uneven in long, hidden waves. I could smell the faint scent of damp soil and old leaves, and every now and then a gust passed through, carrying the smell of something faintly metallic like old rust. I kept going, mostly because turning back felt like giving up too early. I wanted to reach the small clearing I remembered, a flat space near a dip in the land where I thought I'd slept before. But the forest had changed, or maybe I remembered it wrong, because nothing looked familiar. By the time I found a place flat enough for a tent, the sun had already slid behind the trees. The light came in thin strips between branches, making the shadows look stretched and sharp. I dropped my pack, wiped sweat from my forehead, and set up my tent. I pushed the stakes deeper than usual because the soil felt loose in some spots, almost like it had been disturbed recently. When everything was set, I gathered some dead wood for a small fire. The forest stayed completely silent while I worked, and that silence followed me like a slow pressure against the back of my neck. I finally sat down, letting the fire warm my legs while the sky faded from orange to dark blue. The woods around me felt larger in the dim light, like the trees were pulling in closer. I ate slowly, listening to the faint cracking of the fire, trying to keep myself calm. I tried to enjoy the quiet, but something about it felt different from normal quiet. It felt like the silence wasn't natural, like the woods were holding their breath. When it was fully dark, I put out the fire and crawled into the tent. The fabric walls felt thinner than usual. I lay on my back, staring at the faint shape of the ceiling and listening carefully. For a long time there was nothing. No insects, no wind, no rustling. Just an empty stillness that made it hard to breathe normally. I told myself it was fine. I was tired, and the forest was just unusually quiet. But sometime deep into the night, I woke up for no clear reason. My heart was speeding, and my mouth felt dry. There was a sound outside the tent. Not loud, not messy, just steady and slow. It reminded me of footsteps, but not confident ones. More like careful testing steps, the kind you make when you don't want to break a branch. I felt the fabric near my feet shift slightly, as if something passed close, too close, blocking a bit of the air. I stayed completely still, hardly breathing. I could feel my own heartbeat in my throat. The steps moved from one side of the tent to the other, slow and deliberate, like someone studying the shape of the tent from outside. Every few seconds they stopped, and I could almost feel the stillness of whatever was out there, like it was listening for movement inside. I kept my body frozen, even though every muscle ached from tension. After what felt like 15 minutes, but could have been longer, the sound faded away into the trees. I didn't sleep again that night. I lay awake until the first weak light of sunrise touched the tent. When I stepped out in the morning, the cold air hit my face, and I noticed the ground immediately. There were tracks in the soil that hadn't been there when I set up camp. They weren't animal tracks. They were human, bare footprints, unmistakably shaped, leading from the tree line to the back of my tent and then circling around it. The spacing between them made my stomach twist. They were close together, like the person had crept slowly. The footprints went back into the trees and disappeared a few meters away where the forest floor became firmer. My mind tried to make excuses. Maybe another camper wandered through at night. Maybe I just didn't notice the prints earlier. Maybe I had camped too close to someone's usual path. But deep down, none of those explanations fit. The prints were fresh, too fresh, and they circled only my tent. Not a single one went toward the trail or past the clearing. They came only to me. I packed my gear fast, stuffing it into my pack without care for order. I kept imagining someone watching me from the trees, the way the steps had crept around me only hours earlier. I knew I hadn't seen another person the whole previous day. The woods were supposed to be empty. I didn't want to stay another night. I didn't even want to stay another hour. I started heading back toward the trail, but the forest looked different in the morning light. The path I thought I came in on didn't look right. The trees didn't seem placed the same way, and the ground dipped in places I didn't remember. I kept walking anyway, pushing through bushes and ducking under thick branches, trying to find landmarks or anything familiar. Every few minutes, I heard small cracks behind me, not loud enough to be someone running, just small, steady snaps, like someone matching my pace while keeping distance. When I stopped, the sound stopped. When I moved again, they picked up a few breaths later. The air felt thicker, almost warmer, as if the forest itself was closing around me. I pushed faster, breathing harder, sweat sticking to my back. The trees ahead looked endless, and the terrain seemed to twist in ways that didn't make sense. I checked my phone, but there was no signal and the battery had already dropped lower than expected. I tried following the sun's direction, but the canopy above was dense, letting only scattered light through. The sounds behind me came and went, sometimes fading far, sometimes close enough that I could feel the faint vibration through the ground. At one point I found broken branches on the ground, fresh breaks, the wood still pale inside. They were lined up in short stretches, almost like someone had snapped them on purpose while walking. Each broken piece pointed deeper into the trees, as if leading somewhere. I didn't follow them. I forced myself to turn away and keep moving in the opposite direction, even though part of me felt like I was walking blindly. Hours passed. My legs burned. My throat felt dry. The forest didn't end. When I finally found the old dirt road, I almost dropped to my knees. It appeared between the trees so suddenly it felt unreal. I stepped onto it, turning to look behind me. The woods looked calm, untouched, quiet. Too quiet, like the night before. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything, but the skin on my arms stayed tight and cold. I walked the rest of the way to my car without looking back again. I unlocked the door with shaking hands, threw my pack into the back seat, and started the engine. As I drove away, the forest stayed still in the rearview mirror, a dark wall of trees with long shadows stretching across the ground. I didn't stop until I reached a town far from the woods. I sat there in a parking lot, breathing slowly, letting the feeling drain from my body. I kept thinking about the footprints around my tent, the slow steps circling me in the dark, the steady snaps following me through the trees, and the way the forest seemed to hide the trail on purpose. I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Someone had been out there that night, watching me, studying me, walking around my tent with slow and careful steps, and they hadn't left. They were still somewhere in that forest, waiting for the next person who thought they were camping alone. I haven't gone camping since, and I never will again. I began this trip because I wanted a break from noise and people, something quiet where I could reset. I picked a random spot on the map, a stretch of forest that looked empty and harmless, far from any main trail. I told myself it would be simple, just a tent, a small fire, 2 nights alone, and nothing else. I didn't think twice about it. I threw my pack in the car, drove until the road ended, and walked until the sound of the world felt far behind me. The place I chose to camp looked peaceful at first. It was a small flat patch of ground surrounded by tall trees that blocked most of the sky. The air smelled clean, almost sweet, and the soil was soft enough that each step made a faint dull sound. There was a narrow stream not far from the spot, running slow and steady, like something half asleep. When I put my tent up, the whole area felt harmless, almost welcoming, like nothing bad could ever happen here. But the longer I stayed, the quieter it felt in a way I didn't like. It wasn't normal forest quiet. It was something heavier, like the air was thick and waiting. There were no insects buzzing, no birds calling, no leaves shaking except when the wind pushed them. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, and I didn't understand why. As night came, I tried to focus on normal things. I boiled water, made a simple meal, checked my gear, and laid everything out neatly around the tent. But I kept noticing small things that bothered me. The wind didn't blow in a steady flow. It came in short, sharp bursts, strong enough to shake the branches, but then stopping suddenly like someone hitting a switch. The shadows under the trees looked darker than they should, even when there was still light in the sky. And every now and then, I kept thinking I heard something soft in the distance. Not an animal, not footsteps, just a small dull sound like something shifting weight slowly on the ground. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was just not used to this part of the woods. But when the sun fully disappeared and I was left with the dim beam of my flashlight, the feeling grew worse. The dark here felt thick, almost solid, like it pushed against the light instead of letting it cut through. I lay in my tent trying to sleep, but the forest wouldn't let me. I felt every sound. I felt every tiny shift of the wind. At some point, I heard something like a soft slide of dirt being pushed. It was close, too close. It wasn't a heavy sound, but it was slow, like something dragging itself forward an inch at a time. I stayed completely still. My heartbeat felt loud enough to give away my location. The sound stopped. The forest went silent again. But my mind didn't calm down. I kept imagining things moving just outside the thin fabric of my tent. Things I couldn't see. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but I did believe in people and animals and the strange things desperate people might do when far away from society. I tried to reassure myself, but something deep inside me stayed tense. At some point very late in the night, I decided that staying inside the tent made me feel trapped. I stepped outside with my flashlight, trying to breathe slow, trying not to make noise. My boots pressed into the soft dirt and I scanned every corner of the trees. The beam of the light caught long, thin shadows stretching across the ground. The trees felt taller in the dark, like they were leaning in toward me. I could feel the cold night air settle on my skin, heavy and still. I checked the area around the tent first. Nothing odd, nothing touched, nothing missing, but the feeling of being watched stayed right under my skin. I slowly turned toward the path I'd walked earlier that day. The dirt there looked disrupted. It was faint, but it was there, marks that weren't mine. The soil looked pushed in places, like something had been dragged or pressed against it. There were no prints I could identify, just long flat smudges that curved slightly, as if whatever made them had moved slowly and hugged the ground. I stared at those marks for a long time, longer than I should have, my mind trying to make sense of them. Every explanation I thought of made me feel worse. They were too slow-looking to be from a running animal, too controlled to be from something random. They looked like they came from something that moved with purpose, something that stayed low, something that didn't want to be seen. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat inside the tent with the flashlight on, the fabric glowing faintly from the light inside. I stayed completely still and just listened. Every couple of hours, I heard the same slow, dirt-shifting sound again, sometimes farther away, sometimes closer, but always moving, always creeping around in the dark. It never came right up to the tent, but it stayed close enough that I knew it was aware of me. When morning came, the forest looked different again. Not peaceful, just empty, even emptier than before. I walked around carefully, studying the ground, scanning the trees, searching for whatever had moved around my camp the whole night. I found more of those same sliding marks near the stream and a few near the path back out, but nothing else. Nothing that told me what it was. Nothing that made sense. I told myself I would pack up and leave right away, but part of me wanted to understand what had happened. I kept thinking maybe I was overreacting, maybe it was nothing dangerous. I followed the sliding marks deeper into the trees for a short distance. They went on in a strange pattern, weaving between roots and rocks like whatever made them had memorized the terrain. But then they suddenly vanished, like something had lifted straight off the ground and disappeared into thin air. There was no broken branch, no disturbed leaves, no clear direction it had gone. I stood there in the silence for a long moment, staring at the empty ground. That was when a feeling hit me so suddenly and so hard that I didn't even try to reason with it. The feeling that something was still there in the trees around me, not moving, not making a sound, just watching me to see if I would come closer. I felt the weight of that silence on my back as I turned around and walked away as quietly as I could. I didn't run, but every part of my body wanted to. Packing up felt like it took hours even though I rushed through it. My hands shook whenever I heard the slightest noise behind me. The forest still didn't make its normal sounds. It didn't even feel alive. It felt hollow in a way I can't explain, like something had drained the normal life out of it. The walk back to the car felt longer than my entire trip combined. Every few minutes I checked behind me. Every time the wind stopped, my chest tightened. I didn't see anything following me, but I felt something the whole way out. Like the woods didn't want me there, but also didn't want me to leave without knowing it was close. When I finally reached my car and slammed the door shut, I didn't breathe out of relief. I breathed out of survival. I drove away so fast the tires spit dirt behind me. I didn't slow down until the forest was far in the rearview mirror and the road opened into empty land again. Even now, I think about that night more than I want to. The feeling in the dark. The slow, careful movement around my camp. The marks on the ground that stopped without a trace. I remind myself I didn't see anything directly, but not seeing it made it worse. Something real was out there. Something that moved with purpose. Something that got close enough to my tent to let me know it existed without showing itself. Something that wanted to study me in the dark, just to see what I would do. I haven't gone camping alone again. I don't think I ever will, because whatever moved through those trees, whatever dragged itself over that dirt so quietly and so slowly, didn't feel like an animal acting on instinct. It felt like something that understood I was alone. Something that understood the fear that comes from not seeing what's watching you. And the worst part, the part that always comes back to me when I close my eyes at night, is the simple, heavy truth I walked away with. If I had stayed one more night, I don't think it would have kept its distance. The sun was just dipping below the thick line of trees when I arrived at the camping spot. It was a remote area, miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by dense forest and a river that whispered softly in the fading light. I had planned this trip alone to get away from everything: work, people, the noise. Just me, my tent, and the wilderness. I set up my camp quickly, eager to get a fire going before darkness took over completely. The ground was uneven, covered in dry leaves and broken branches. I picked a spot close to the riverbank, where the ground was a little flatter, but still firm. I laid out my sleeping bag, arranged my gear, and gathered some dry wood. The smell of pine and earth filled the air. Birds were chirping their last songs of the day, and the sky was turning a deep shade of orange. Once the fire was crackling, I sat back and let the warmth soak into my bones. The quiet was almost complete, broken only by the river's flow and the occasional rustle of small animals in the bushes. I felt a calm I hadn't known in months. I cooked some canned beans over the fire, ate slowly, and then packed away my food carefully. I knew from past camping trips how important it was not to leave any scraps lying around. The forest was full of animals, and some could be dangerous. Night fell fast. The forest transformed around me. Shapes and shadows grew taller, more distinct. The fire was my only barrier against the darkness. I kept watching the edge of the woods, half expecting to see eyes watching me back. But nothing came, only the usual sounds: the hoot of an owl, the snap of a twig, the distant call of a coyote. I tried to relax, but a strange feeling was settling over me. a quiet tension I couldn't shake. Around midnight, I decided to go to my tent. I stood up and moved carefully, listening. The fire was dying down to glowing embers, so I added more wood. The flames jumped back to life, casting flickering light all around. I lay down inside the tent, zipped it shut, and turned off my flashlight. I was just drifting off when I heard it. A sharp, crunching sound, like footsteps on dry leaves, coming from outside. I froze, holding my breath. The sound was slow and deliberate, coming closer in small, careful steps. My heart pounded hard in my chest. The forest was supposed to be empty except for me. Maybe an animal, I told myself. A bear or a large deer. But the sound didn't fit. It was too soft, too quiet for a big animal moving through dry leaves. I stayed still, listening. The noise circled around my tent slowly, making a full round. Then it stopped, dead silent for what felt like minutes. Then, without warning, there was a loud snap right outside my tent, like a branch breaking under weight. I held my breath, waiting for what came next. After a while, I heard nothing more. I stayed inside, trembling, but refused to get out until dawn. When the first light started to filter through the trees, I peeked outside cautiously. The fire was almost out, and the ground around my tent was disturbed. Footprints pressed into the soft earth, heavy and large. They circled the camp and disappeared into the woods. I felt a chill that wasn't from the cold. The prints didn't look like any animal I knew. They were too big, too wide, and had an odd shape like a heavy boot but deeper and rougher. I gathered my things quickly, packed up my tent, and started walking back the way I came, trying not to look back. The forest seemed different in the daylight. Shadows were softer, but the silence felt heavier. I kept my eyes sharp, looking for anything unusual. The footprints reappeared along the trail, following mine but not matching my step or size. They were there, clear as day, all the way to the main road. When I finally reached my car, I felt relief wash over me. I checked the doors and windows twice before getting in. The engine started without trouble, and I drove away without looking back once. On the way back, I kept thinking about those prints and the way the steps had circled my camp. Something had been watching me, something big, careful, and silent. The next day, I went to the ranger station to report what I saw. The ranger listened but didn't seem surprised. He told me stories of a man who lived deep in the woods years ago. Someone who never left, never wanted to be found. The man was known to follow people who came too close to his land. No one really knew if he was still there, but hikers sometimes found strange footprints or saw movement in the trees at night. I realized then how lucky I had been. The man or whatever had stayed just out of reach, watching but not attacking. But it was clear. The forest wasn't empty, and I had entered someone's territory. That person had been close enough to circle my camp and break a branch right next to my tent. I learned something important that trip. Sometimes, the scariest things aren't monsters or ghosts. They are people, silent and unseen, hiding where no one expects, watching from the shadows. And when you're alone in the woods, you're not as safe as you think. From then on, I never camped alone again, and I always made sure someone knew exactly where I was going. The woods are beautiful, but they hold secrets that don't want to be found. My trip had been meant to be a peaceful escape, but instead, it became a lesson in respect and caution. Because sometimes, the real danger isn't the wild itself. It's what lives quietly inside it, waiting, watching, and knowing you're there. And that's something I'll never forget. The sun was already low when I reached the camping spot deep in the forest. I had chosen this place because it was far away from any trails or other campers. I wanted silence and solitude, just me and the trees. The air smelled fresh and earthy, with the faint scent of pine and damp soil. The ground was soft beneath my boots, and the thick trunks of tall trees rose all around like silent guards. I unpacked slowly, setting up my tent on a small clearing covered with dry leaves. The spot was perfect, flat and shielded by a few bushes and saplings. I pulled out my sleeping bag, laid it inside, and stacked my gear nearby. I had enough food and water for 2 days, a flashlight, matches, a small axe, and a sturdy knife. The sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows through the woods. The forest grew darker and quieter as night approached. Birds stopped singing, and the wind settled into a soft whisper among the branches. I made a small fire with dry sticks and twigs, careful to keep it low. The crackling fire was comforting, and the orange glow warmed the chill in the air. I cooked a simple meal of canned beans heated over the fire and ate slowly, feeling the solitude wrap around me like a heavy blanket. After eating, I sat close to the fire, listening to the small sounds of the night. Insects buzzed, leaves rustled gently, and the occasional snap of a twig echoed far away. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even. I looked up at the stars peeking through the canopy and felt a strange calmness. That calmness shattered just as I was about to crawl into my sleeping bag. A sudden, sharp crack came from behind the trees about 50 feet away. It was loud enough to make me freeze. My heart jumped, but I told myself it was probably a falling branch or an animal moving. The forest was full of creatures, after all. I grabbed my flashlight and swung it slowly over the dark woods. The beam cut through the black, landing on thick tree trunks and underbrush. Nothing moved. I lowered the light and waited. The silence returned, but my skin prickled. Then, another sound, quiet footsteps, slow and deliberate, breaking twigs and rustling leaves. The footsteps circled the clearing, getting closer but always just out of sight behind the trees. My mind raced. This wasn't a deer or a rabbit. Those sounds were heavier, more cautious, like someone trying to stay hidden. I picked up my knife and flashlight, ready to defend myself if needed. Minutes passed, maybe an hour, though it felt like forever. The footsteps stopped just beyond the firelight. Then I heard a low, guttural growl. My body tensed, every muscle tight. I knew bears could growl like that. My campfire wasn't big enough to scare a bear, but I didn't want to make a scene and risk provoking it. I stayed perfectly still, holding my breath, hoping the firelight would keep whatever it was away. The growling stopped abruptly, and the footsteps faded into the darkness. I didn't dare move until I was sure the forest had returned to its usual quiet. That night, I barely slept. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept my knife close and the flashlight on the ground beside my sleeping bag. The cold air pressed against my skin, and I wrapped myself tightly in the sleeping bag, eyes wide open. At first light, I packed everything up in silence, my hands shaking slightly. I wanted to leave but needed to check if my camp was still safe. The fire was out, the ashes cold and gray. I looked around carefully. There were large paw prints near the edge of the clearing, deep and fresh. The claws were visible in the soft soil. It was a bear, and it had been very close. I didn't want to stay another night after that. Bears were dangerous, especially if they felt threatened or if food was around. I grabbed my pack and started hiking back toward the trail, moving fast but carefully. The forest seemed less inviting now, its shadows deeper and its noises harsher. I stuck to the main path, avoiding thick bushes and dark corners. Every sound made me glance over my shoulder. Every shadow looked like a threat. After an hour, I saw the faint outline of a small cabin through the trees. I didn't know if it was occupied, but it was better than the woods. I hurried toward it, hoping for shelter or a sign of people. The cabin was old, with weathered wooden walls and a rusty metal roof. The door was slightly open. Inside, there was a dusty table and some empty chairs, but no people. I found a box of matches and some dry wood in a corner. I lit a small fire in the rusty stove and sat down, trying to calm my nerves. I stayed there until late afternoon, waiting for someone or for help. The sun was low again when I finally saw a group of hikers on the trail. I waved frantically, and they noticed me. I told them about the bear tracks and the noises in the night. They nodded seriously and offered to guide me out. We walked together through the forest, the sounds of the woods less scary with company around. The sun dipped below the trees as we reached the edge of the forest where cars and roads appeared. The city noise felt loud and harsh, but it was a relief. Looking back once more, the forest seemed calm, almost peaceful in the fading light. But I knew the danger had been real and close. The bear had been curious or maybe hungry, and I was lucky it didn't come into the clearing while I slept. That night, safe at home, I thought about the forest and the bear. Nature was wild and unpredictable. No stories or legends, just real animals surviving. It wasn't about ghosts or monsters, but about respect and caution. I had learned that the hard way. Camping alone in the wild was peaceful and beautiful, but it could also be dangerous if you didn't stay alert and understand the risks. From now on, I would never camp in the deep woods without a plan, without someone knowing exactly where I was, and without proper gear to protect myself from the real dangers out there. The forest was no place for mistakes, and I had come very close to paying a high price for one. I walked into the woods that afternoon with the same calm confidence I always carried when I camped alone. But something about that trip felt off from the moment I stepped out of my car. The air felt heavier than usual, thick in a way that made my skin feel damp even though the sky was clear. The forest was quiet in a strange way, not peaceful quiet but empty quiet, like everything in the trees was watching me and holding still. I tried to ignore that feeling and focused on getting my pack on my shoulders and locking the car. I had picked that place at random. I wanted something new, something deeper into the woods than the usual spots I used. I had looked at a satellite map the night before and saw a big patch of forest that looked untouched. No trails, no campsites, no cabins. I liked the idea of being completely alone. At least that's what I thought I wanted. The hike in was simple at first. The ground was soft from old pine needles, and the smell of sap mixed with the cold air. Every time I stepped, I heard that dry crunch that usually relaxed me, but for some reason it didn't this time. The deeper I walked, the less sound I heard. No wind, no insects, no birds, just the faint noise of my own feet hitting the ground. The silence felt unnatural, so strong that at one point I stopped walking just to see if I could hear anything else at all. Couldn't. That was when I started to realize how far I must have gotten from the main trails. After about an hour and a half of hiking, I found a small flat clearing between tall trees. The ground didn't look disturbed, and there were no old fire rings or footprints. It felt like no one had camped there in years. That usually made me feel good, like I had found a private place, but this time the emptiness made my stomach feel tight. Still, it was a perfect open spot, so I dropped my pack and started setting up. I spent a long time choosing where to put the tent because I kept feeling like something about the clearing wasn't right. I kept glancing at the tree line. Every shadow looked like it was shaped wrong. Every little gap between branches looked too dark. I knew that was just my brain adjusting to being alone in a new place, so I forced myself to focus. I set the tent up tight, organized my gear, gathered some dry sticks, and drank some water. The whole time I kept listening for the usual wildlife sounds, but the forest stayed silent. By the time the sun started sinking behind the trees, the quiet had turned into something heavy, pressed on my ears. Even when I moved around, the sound of my own steps felt too loud. I kept checking over my shoulder without meaning to. The clearing looked normal, but my mind kept picking out strange shapes in the tall grass or between the trees, making me feel watched. I tried to calm myself by making a small fire, thinking the light would help settle me. The fire crackled softly, but even that sound felt like it didn't belong in the forest. As the sky turned dark, the temperature dropped fast. The cold air felt sharp when I breathed in. I sat by the fire and ate a quick meal, but I barely tasted it because I kept glancing into the woods. The fire lit the trees nearest me, but beyond that everything was pitch black, so dark it looked solid. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, not moving, not making a sound, just standing still and watching me. I kept trying to tell myself it was just my mind adjusting to the dark, but the fear crept up slowly like cold water rising around my legs. I stayed outside until the fire dropped to embers. I didn't want to go into the tent because the idea of lying down in the dark with only a thin sheet between me and the woods made my chest feel tight. But eventually the cold forced me inside. I zipped the tent shut and crawled into my sleeping bag. The inside of the tent felt even quieter than outside. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping against the sleeping bag. Hours passed slowly. I didn't sleep. I just lay there staring up at the thin nylon, waiting for my body to relax, but it never did. Every few minutes I heard faint noises, nothing loud, just tiny things. A soft shift of leaves, faint crunch, a light tap like a twig falling. Each sound was small, but in a forest that had been dead silent all day, they felt huge. My mind kept imagining footsteps, slow ones, careful ones. At one point, much later in the night, I felt a vibration run lightly through the ground under me. Not from something heavy, but like something had brushed against the soil nearby. I froze. My whole body went stiff. My breathing got shallow. I waited for another vibration, but none came. I told myself it could have been anything. A tree branch falling, the cold soil shifting, but deep down my body reacted as if something alive had moved. I must have stayed awake until almost dawn. When the first weak light filtered through the tent, it felt like a weight lifted off my chest. I got out fast, relieved to be out of the tight nylon space. The forest looked normal again in the daylight, but something had changed. The clearing didn't look untouched anymore. There were marks on the ground near the trees, thin lines in the dirt. They weren't footprints. They weren't from animals. They looked like something had been dragged lightly through the edge of the clearing. They circled around the far side, looping halfway around my campsite, and then vanished into the trees. I tried to convince myself they were nothing, maybe the wind brushing branches or something falling during the night, but I remembered the silence. There hadn't been wind, not even a breeze. I didn't want to stay another night. My nerves felt stretched thin, and the strange patterns in the dirt made my stomach churn. I packed up as fast as I could, trying not to look toward the tree line too much. Every time I glanced up, the shadows between the trunks looked deeper than they should, like they were hiding something standing perfectly still. The hike back took longer than the hike in. My legs felt shaky, and I kept turning around even though I knew nothing was behind me. The forest stayed silent all the way back, the same dead, heavy silence that made every snap of a twig under my boot feel like a signal. I didn't breathe normally until I saw my car through the trees. When I finally got inside and shut the door, I felt the first real sense of safety since arriving. I drove out of the forest fast, watching the road behind me more than I watched what was in front. When I reached the main road, the tension in my body finally slipped away, but the fear stayed. The next day, I opened the satellite map again. I looked at that patch of untouched forest I had picked at random, and for the first time I really noticed how strange it looked. No paths, no old roads, no signs of past use, just a perfect, empty square of trees sitting in the middle of a normal forest, like something had kept people out for a long time. I don't know what was out there, but whatever moved around my campsite that night, whatever made those strange marks in the dirt, it wasn't imagination. It wasn't a ghost or some fantasy thing. It was something real, something that lived deep in those woods, something that moved without sound. And I know one thing clearly now, whatever it was, it didn't want me there. I haven't gone camping alone since, and I never will again. I went camping deep in the northern woods at the end of summer, choosing a place far from the usual trails because I wanted complete silence. The kind of silence you can only find when the trees block out the rest of the world. I picked a random spot on the map, just a small clearing near a narrow stream that twisted through the forest like a silver line. The drive there took hours on dirt roads that looked like they hadn't been used in years. When I finally stepped out of the car, the air felt colder than I expected, with the smell of wet earth and pine needles, and the sound of the stream running somewhere beyond the trees. I carried my pack, tent, food, and a cheap folding chair into the clearing. The ground was uneven, covered in soft moss that felt like a sponge under my boots. I set up the tent slowly, taking my time, because the light was still bright enough. The sun filtered through the tall pines in thin strips, and the air was still. I could hear birds somewhere above me, but other than that, the whole place felt untouched. It was the kind of place where you felt like no one had walked through for years. The kind of place that swallowed noise and made you feel alone in a way that was both peaceful and unsettling. After setting everything up, I walked down to the stream. The water was cold, clear, and moving fast enough to make small ripples over the rocks. I washed my hands in it and felt that sharp cold shoot up my arms. The ground near the water was damp and darker than the rest of the clearing. I noticed some old boot prints in the mud, half washed away, probably weeks old. They were deep, made by someone carrying a heavy load or someone heavier than me. I didn't think much of it then. A lot of people walked through forests. It didn't have to mean anything. As the sun lowered, the temperature dropped quickly. I lit a small fire, enough to warm myself but not large enough to attract too much attention. The forest grew darker faster than I expected. The shadows thickened between the trees until they looked solid, and the wind that barely moved during the day now slipped between branches and made soft, almost too soft, movements in the leaves. I sat in my chair, eating a simple meal, listening to the fire crack and pop, while watching the darkness slowly wrap around my little circle of light. I felt calm for a while, just listening to the night. But then, sometime after full dark settled, I began noticing small things. A branch snapping far off. Not loud, but sharp enough to echo. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it could be anything. A deer, raccoon, even a falling limb. But a few minutes later, I heard another one. This time closer, maybe 50 yards away. Then silence again. That long, heavy silence that hangs in the air and presses on your ears. I turned my head slowly, staring deeper into the tree line. At first I saw nothing but black shapes and thin glints of light reflecting off leaves. But I had the feeling that something was in there, something watching or at least moving differently from the random rustles of animals. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, that reaction my body had before my mind could understand anything. The fire burned lower even though I added more wood. I realized I didn't want to turn my back to the forest, so I stayed seated, facing outward, my eyes trying to adjust to the darkness. The wind died again, and the air became still, but the feeling that something was out there stayed strong. Stronger than anything I had felt camping before. After maybe an hour, I heard a soft crunch of leaves, slow and steady, not the quick movement of an animal running. It sounded like steps, spaced apart just enough to belong to something walking on 2 feet. The sound moved from one point to another, stopping every now and then. Each pause stretched out for too long. My chest tightened, and I felt my breathing get shallow without meaning to. I reached for my flashlight, gripping it harder than I needed to. When I finally lifted it and pointed it toward the noise, the beam shook in my hand. The light hit tree trunks and low bushes, nothing else. But then I noticed something strange. A tree about 20 yards away had fresh scrape marks on the bark. Long vertical marks where the outer layer had been peeled away. I didn't remember seeing those earlier. They looked recent, maybe a day old. Someone had done that with something sharp. Not an animal. I felt a knot form in my stomach. The woods around me suddenly felt too quiet, like the entire forest was holding its breath. I decided to put out the fire, thinking maybe darkness would hide me better than a glowing circle in the middle of the clearing. I spread the coals with a stick, smothering them with dirt. When the last ember went out, I felt the darkness swallow everything around me. The air grew colder. My ears strained for any sound. I crawled into my tent, not because I believed it would protect me, but because it felt like the only thing I could do. Inside, the thin fabric made every outside noise feel closer. I lay on my sleeping bag, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling of the tent. My heartbeat sounded too loud in my ears. I tried to keep still, tried to breathe slowly, but every few minutes I heard something outside. The soft crunch of leaves, the faint drag of something across the ground, the kind of sounds that made you imagine someone slowly circling your camp. Hours passed like that, slow and nerve-shaking. Just when I thought I might be overreacting, I heard something that froze me completely. Footsteps. Clear, slow, steady footsteps walking right past my tent. Not rushing, not running, just walking, as if someone was scouting the area carefully. I held my breath and stayed completely still. The steps stopped behind my tent, close enough that I could hear the faint shift of weight in the dirt. I felt my entire body tense so hard that my muscles shook. After what felt like minutes, the steps moved again, heading toward the trees. I waited as long as I could before slowly unzipping my backpack and pulling out the small hatchet I had brought. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I knew I wouldn't sleep, not even for a second. The noises eventually faded, but the fear never did. I lay awake until the first thin light of dawn appeared through the tent fabric. When I finally stepped outside, the cold air hit me hard. The clearing looked normal at first, almost calm. But then I saw the footprints. Not animal prints, actual boot prints, deep ones, circling my entire campsite. They weren't mine. I followed them with my eyes, and they disappeared into the trees in a straight line. That was all I needed to see. I packed my gear as fast as I could, stuffing everything into my backpack without caring if it fit neatly. I left the fire pit, the cleared area, everything the way it was, and walked quickly back toward the dirt road. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me. When I finally reached my car, the sight of it made me feel like I had broken free from something heavy that had been closing in around me all night. I drove away without stopping, without looking back. Only when I got home did the full weight of what happened settle in. Someone had been out there, walking through the woods late at night, standing right outside my tent, circling my camp. They didn't take anything, didn't leave any message, didn't make a sound that suggested they wanted attention. They just watched, and that silence felt worse than anything else. I never returned to that clearing. I never even tried to look for that spot on the map again. What scared me the most wasn't what I heard, but what I didn't hear. The slow, patient steps of someone who didn't need to rush. Someone who had been out there before I arrived and was comfortable moving through the dark, while I lay in a thin tent with nothing but fear holding me still. And knowing that they were walking out there long before I heard them was the one detail that made everything clear to me afterward. I wasn't alone at any point that night. I just didn't notice soon enough. I had planned the camping trip for weeks, excited to get away from the noise of the city and spend some time alone in the woods. I packed carefully: tent, sleeping bag, enough food and water, a small stove, flashlight, and a first aid kit. I wanted to keep things simple but safe. The spot I chose was deep in the forest, far from any roads or trails. I needed silence, space, and nothing but the sounds of nature around me. The day started sunny and clear. I hiked for hours, following a narrow path that got rougher the deeper I went. Trees towered overhead, their leaves creating a green roof that blocked most of the sky. The forest smelled fresh, damp with earth and pine. Birds called out here and there, but their songs seemed distant and quiet. I found a small clearing near a creek to set up camp. The ground was soft with moss and pine needles, perfect for the tent. Setting up the tent took longer than I expected because the ground was uneven. Small roots and rocks pushed against the fabric, but eventually, I got it tight and secure. I built a small fire pit a few feet from the tent, clearing away dry leaves and twigs. Then I collected wood for the fire, stacking it carefully to keep the flames steady. I liked the fire crackling and popping, the warmth it gave as the sun started to drop behind the trees. The first night was calm. I cooked some canned beans on the stove and ate slowly, watching the shadows flicker around the clearing. I felt peaceful, like I was part of the forest. After eating, I lay on my sleeping pad inside the tent and looked out through the mesh window at the stars beginning to show. The quiet was almost complete, except for the creek's gentle rush nearby. Then, around midnight, something changed. I woke suddenly. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the tent's walls were still. The air felt heavy, and I noticed the silence was different. Too quiet, like the forest had stopped breathing. The creek sound was gone. No rustle of animals or insects. Even the usual night birds were silent. I sat up and listened carefully. Then I heard it. A slow, heavy footstep on the dirt, close to the clearing. Not one, but several, spaced out and deliberate. The sound was too large for any deer or normal animal. My heart jumped, pounding hard against my chest. I didn't want to move or make noise, so I stayed still, barely breathing. The footsteps moved slowly around the edge of the clearing, circling the fire pit. I could feel the presence of something big watching. Every now and then, a twig snapped under a heavy weight, and the crunch of dry leaves broke the silence. The light from my small flashlight was inside the tent, turned off so nothing would give away my position. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps stopped. But then, from the far side of the clearing, I heard something else. The faint scrape of metal on wood. My mind raced trying to think what it could be. I remembered I had left my pocket knife outside, near the fire pit. Someone, or something, was close enough to find it. I tried to stay calm, but the fear was sharp and raw. I knew if it was a person, they could easily break the tent or grab me. If it was an animal, it was too large and quiet, and those metal scraping sounds didn't make sense. I gripped my flashlight tightly, ready to turn it on and defend myself if needed. The noises stopped as suddenly as they began. The forest slowly came back to life. The creek's soft flow, a few distant owl calls, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I waited for another long time before moving, still frozen inside the tent. In the morning, I stepped outside carefully. The fire pit was untouched, but around it, the ground was disturbed. Deep footprints pressed into the soft earth circled the clearing. The prints were much bigger than my boots and uneven, like someone had been walking carefully to avoid snapping twigs but still left marks. Near the edge of the fire pit, I found my pocket knife lying on the ground, the blade open and scratched as if it had been used recently. My heart pounded again, but I felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. Someone had been there, close enough to touch my things, and yet they hadn't tried to harm me, or at least not that night. I packed my gear quickly, feeling a cold sweat. I wanted to leave but couldn't ignore the question. Why? Who would be out here, sneaking around in the middle of the night? The forest was too far from any town for casual visitors, and the nearest road was a 2-hour walk away. As I walked back along the trail, I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the shadows between the trees. The woods felt different now, like a place that held secrets, and I wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't hear footsteps again, but the memory of them stayed with me, heavy and real. By the time I reached my car, the sun was high and warm again. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the forest behind me, feeling lucky and shaken. I didn't speak to anyone about what happened because it sounded strange. Too close to something you couldn't explain but didn't want to make into a story about monsters or ghosts. I think now it was someone living in the forest. Maybe a hunter or someone hiding from the world. They had watched me but didn't attack. Maybe they wanted to scare me off, or maybe they were just cautious themselves. Whatever it was, that night changed how I see the wilderness. It's not just quiet and peaceful. There are things out there, hidden in the dark, that don't want to be found. Things that move silently and watch, waiting. I never went back to that spot, and I never planned to. The forest kept its secrets well, and I learned to respect that some places are better left alone. I packed my gear the day before leaving for the camping trip, excited but also careful. The spot was deep in the forest, far from any main roads or towns. I wanted to get away from everything. No phones, no people, just me in the woods. I told myself it would be simple. Set up camp, cook some food, hike a bit, and enjoy the quiet. But what happened was nothing like what I expected. The drive out was long, with the road turning from paved to dirt, then barely a trail by the time I parked the car. I grabbed my backpack and double-checked my supplies: tent, sleeping bag, food, water, flashlight, extra batteries. Everything seemed fine. The forest was dense and smelled fresh, the tall trees blocking out most of the afternoon sun. The air was cooler here, with a faint smell of pine and wet earth. I felt calm at first, the kind of calm that comes when you know you're completely alone. Setting up the tent took more time than I thought. The ground was uneven and full of rocks, roots poking out from the dirt. After some trial and error, I managed to pitch the tent near a small clearing. There was a narrow stream a few feet away, its water clear and cold. I decided that spot was good enough for the night. I unpacked a little, laying out my sleeping bag inside the tent, and gathered some dry wood for a fire. The sun was already dipping below the trees by the time I got the fire started, the flames crackling and sending up little sparks. Dinner was simple. Some canned beans and bread I heated over the fire. I ate slowly, listening to the forest sounds. Birds calling, the rustle of small animals in the bushes, the steady flow of the stream. The temperature dropped fast after the sun went down, and the darkness came quickly too, swallowing the clearing and everything beyond it. I checked my flashlight, made sure the batteries were fresh. I wasn't scared yet, but I was aware. The forest at night has a way of making you feel small. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was a deer or some other animal, but the sound was strange. Low and deep, almost like a growl mixed with heavy breathing. It wasn't far, maybe 20 or 30 feet away, but I couldn't see anything through the thick trees and bushes. I sat still, my heart beating faster. The noise didn't stop. It moved, circling around the clearing. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the sound, but the beam only hit dark shadows. No eyes reflected back. The breathing grew louder, heavier, like something big was close. I knew bears lived in these woods, and maybe a wild animal had wandered near. I had a bear spray in my pack, but it was in the tent. Slowly, I tried to stay calm, telling myself to wait and see if it would leave. But then something heavier crashed through the brush behind me. I whipped around, flashlight shaking in my hand, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of a large shape moving quickly between the trees. It was too big and too fast for any deer or smaller animal. My breath caught. I knew I had to be careful. The forest was full of dangers, and being alone meant I had to trust my senses more than ever. The noise stopped suddenly, and the forest fell silent again. That silence was worse than the noise. I stayed by the fire, keeping it alive as long as I could, watching the dark edges of the clearing. Then, about an hour later, I heard footsteps, slow and heavy. They circled around the firelight again, but this time I wasn't frozen. I grabbed a thick branch from the firewood pile and held it ready. The footsteps stopped close to the edge of the light, but nothing appeared. I felt the cold sweat run down my neck. The fire was almost out, and the night was completely dark now. I was alone with something moving just beyond the reach of my light. Suddenly, a loud snap from a broken branch off to the left made me spin around. I swung the branch in the direction, hoping to scare whatever was there. But again, nothing. No sound, no movement, just the forest, alive and silent. I realized I had made a mistake by letting the fire get low. The light and warmth were the only things keeping me safe from whatever was out there. I grabbed my flashlight and my bear spray, backed slowly toward the tent, my eyes scanning every shadow. I got inside, zipped the door closed, and turned on the flashlight. I kept it shining outside, waiting for something to show itself. Minutes passed like hours. I felt my hands trembling and my heart pounding hard enough I thought it might burst. My mind raced through everything I had read or heard about encounters in the wild. Most ended badly when people panicked or made noise. Then I heard a soft growl, low and guttural, right outside the tent. I froze. Whatever it was close, too close. I raised the bear spray but didn't use it. The growling stopped, and I waited, breathing shallow. After a long moment, I heard footsteps retreating slowly into the darkness. I stayed quiet, too afraid to move or breathe too loudly. Hours later, just before dawn, the forest around me was calm again. The sky started to lighten, and I could finally see through the trees. I unzipped the tent and peeked outside. Nothing but broken branches and disturbed leaves. No footprints, no signs of any animal nearby, just the regular forest floor. I packed up quickly, not wanting to stay one more minute. I had no idea what it was that came close that night, but it wasn't something small or harmless. On the hike back to my car, I kept checking behind me. The forest that had seemed so peaceful now felt hostile. I told myself it wasn't a ghost or a monster, just a wild animal, maybe a bear or a big cat. But the way it moved, the sounds it made, it was different. More cautious, more aware of me than I was of it. When I reached the road and started my car, I looked back once at the dark trees. I realized that sometimes Nature isn't just quiet or beautiful. Sometimes, it's a reminder that we are visitors in a world where we don't always belong. That night taught me respect for the wild, and that being prepared isn't just about gear. It's about understanding how small you really are in the face of something unknown but real. And that was enough for me to never camp alone in the deep forest again. I set out early in the morning, alone, to go camping deep in the woods where the trees were tall and thick, and the trails barely worn. I wanted to get away from the noise and the crowds, just me and nature. The air was cool and fresh, with the smell of pine needles and damp earth filling my lungs as I hiked farther from the road. I carried my backpack with all the basics: tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small stove, and some extra clothes. I had a map and compass, but mostly I was relying on my own sense of direction and the faint trail marked on the ground. The forest was quiet except for the sounds of birds and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I noticed the way the sunlight slipped through the high branches, casting long shadows on the forest floor. The ground was soft with layers of fallen leaves and moss, and I stepped carefully to avoid snapping twigs. After a few hours, I found a small clearing by a slow-moving creek, perfect for setting up camp. The area was surrounded by tall fir trees, with thick roots twisting out of the earth like giant veins. I picked a spot for my tent near the water but far enough to avoid any dampness. Setting up the tent took some time, securing the poles and stretching the rainfly tight. I gathered some dry wood and kindling for a fire and built a small circle of stones to contain it. The fire was important. It would keep me warm and keep animals away at night. As the afternoon wore on, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I cooked a simple meal on my stove, canned beans and rice, and ate while watching the shadows grow longer. After eating, I cleaned up carefully, making sure no food scraps were left around that might attract animals. I stored my food tightly in a plastic container and hung it from a high branch with rope, far from the tent. When darkness fully settled, the forest became a different place. The sounds changed, too. The birds were quiet, replaced by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant call of a coyote. The fire crackled, its light flickering and casting dancing shadows on the trees. I stayed close to the fire, watching the glowing embers and feeling the chill of the night air creeping in. The stars were bright above me, clear and sharp through the gaps in the branches. Suddenly, I heard a faint snapping of a twig somewhere beyond the circle of firelight. At first, I thought it was a small animal, but then the sound repeated, slow and deliberate, like someone stepping carefully through the underbrush. My heart sped up. I sat very still, listening closely. The sound came from the edge of the clearing, just beyond where the firelight could reach. I grabbed my flashlight from the ground and shone the beam into the darkness. The light cut through the night but showed only trees and shadows. No movement. The snapping sounds stopped. I put the flashlight down, telling myself it was probably a deer or some other wild animal moving through the forest. I tried to calm down and went inside my tent to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. Every little noise made me tense up. The wind rustling through leaves sounded like whispering. Branches knocking against each other sounded like footsteps. My mind raced with thoughts about bears or other dangerous animals nearby, even though I'd taken every precaution. At some point during the night, I woke up to a sharp crack. It was close this time, right outside the tent. I lay frozen, holding my breath, trying to hear more. The tent fabric shifted slightly, and I caught the faintest sound of breathing. I didn't want to move or make a sound, afraid that whatever was outside might hear me. The minutes felt like hours until the noises stopped. I waited longer, but nothing else happened. As dawn began to break, I cautiously unzipped the tent and peered out. The forest was quiet again, the early morning light soft and gentle. Then I noticed the marks on the ground near the fire pit. They were footprints larger than mine with deep impressions like heavy boots. The prints came from the edge of the forest, circling the clearing and stopping near my tent. They looked fresh. Whoever or whatever had made them had been right here during the night. I felt a wave of relief mixed with fear. Relief that I was still safe, but fear because I knew I wasn't alone out there. This was no ghost story or fantasy. It was real. Someone had been watching me. Someone had come close enough to touch my camp. I quickly packed my things, not stopping for anything. The forest suddenly felt cold and unfriendly. Every shadow seemed to hide eyes. Every sound was a warning. I didn't want to wait to see if the visitor would come back. I hurried down the trail, back toward the road, my footsteps quick and uneven. The walk back was tense and exhausting. I kept looking over my shoulder, hearing noises I wasn't sure were there. The safety of civilization pulled me forward with each step. When I finally saw the faint outline of my car through the trees, I felt a huge rush of relief. I didn't stop until I was inside, doors locked and engine running. Looking back, the experience stayed with me. The forest was beautiful and peaceful during the day, but at night, it was unpredictable and dangerous. It wasn't about ghosts or monsters. It was about real things. People, wild animals, the rawness of nature, and the vulnerability of being alone in a place where someone could come close without being seen. From then on, I understood the real risk of camping alone in remote places. It was not just the weather or animals that could hurt you. Sometimes the scariest thing was the idea that another person could be out there, unseen, watching you, waiting for the right moment to step into your world. And that thought never left me, even long after I was safely back home. I went camping alone in late autumn because I thought the cold air and empty woods would help me clear my head. I picked a deep section of forest that I had never been to before, a place with long, thin trees packed closely together and trails that twisted so much that the map looked like a knot. I wanted something random and far from everything, and this area felt perfect for that. I parked my car at a small dirt pull-off and carried my backpack and small tent into the woods, thinking I would only stay one night and return in the morning. The sun was already low when I started walking, and the air felt dry and sharp, brushing against my face like thin sandpaper. The farther I walked, the quieter everything became. Even the usual forest sounds felt lighter, like they were being swallowed. I kept noticing how the ground was covered with old leaves that had turned a dark brown, almost black, from the cold moisture. Every step I took made a soft cracking sound, and the smell of old, wet wood filled my nose. It took almost an hour of walking before I found a flat area not too far from a small slope. It wasn't anything special, but it felt hidden, and I liked that. I set up my tent slowly, taking my time to make sure it was tight and stable because the air had that feeling of an incoming wind. When I finally sat down to rest, the sky had already turned gray. I could barely see the sun anymore, but the woods still had that faint glow that hangs right before full darkness. I sat on a fallen log and just listened. There were no voices, no engines, no signs of anyone. I remember thinking how nice it felt to be completely alone like that. But after a few minutes, the air changed. There was a strange drop in temperature that didn't feel natural for how slowly the sun had gone down. It felt like someone had opened a freezer door behind me. My breath started coming out as white smoke. I didn't think much of it at first. The temperature always drops fast in the woods. But then I heard something higher up on the slope behind my tent. It wasn't the sound of a branch breaking or a small animal. It was heavier, like something putting pressure on the ground. I stayed still and tried to tell myself it was just a deer or maybe even a wild boar, but something about the rhythm of the sound didn't match any animal I knew. It sounded slow, careful, and spaced out, as if whatever was up there was choosing each step with purpose. I ate a little food, trying to ignore the sound, but it kept happening. One step, then a long pause, then another step. I felt a growing tightness in my stomach that made it hard to swallow. The darkness kept building around me until I couldn't see beyond a few feet. I used my small flashlight to walk around the area to reassure myself, but every time I turned it toward the slope, the light seemed to die before it reached far. The trees on that hill were too close together, too many shadows stacked on shadows. When it became fully dark, the sound stopped. The woods around me went completely still, so still that I could hear my heartbeat inside my ears. I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut, trying to calm myself by focusing on the fabric walls and the faint smell of plastic. I laid there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening for anything. The cold kept pressing against the tent like invisible fingers. It must have been around midnight when I woke suddenly. I didn't remember falling asleep, but I woke with that sharp jolt you get when something isn't right. I realized what had woken me. A new sound outside. This time it wasn't on the slope. It was right behind my tent. I could hear the weight of something shifting slowly in the leaves. There was no wind at all, so every movement was sharp and clear. It was so close I could feel the tiny vibrations through the ground. I stayed as still as possible, barely breathing. The sound grew clearer, and I recognized it as footsteps. Heavy, slow, and dragging slightly, as if whatever it was had something uneven about the way it moved. My brain kept trying to tell me it was an animal, but no animal I knew moved like that. The steps circled the tent, very slowly. I could picture something large walking around, trying to study what I was. A thick pressure built in my head until I felt dizzy. I kept waiting for the zipper to move, even though I had no reason to believe someone would try to open it. The footsteps stopped at the front of the tent. I felt a faint push against the fabric, like something was pressing on it gently. I stared at the spot in the dark, barely able to blink. The pressure lasted maybe 3 seconds, then disappeared. I heard the steps again, moving away this time, heading toward the slope. The sound got quieter, softer, then faded into nothing. I didn't sleep again. I just waited, staring at the thin line of dawn slowly growing brighter through the tent fabric. The moment I saw enough light, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The cold morning air felt sharp on my face, but I welcomed it because at least I could see now. The campsite looked normal at first. Nothing was disturbed, but when I walked toward the place where the footsteps had circled, I saw the ground. The leaves had been pushed aside in a pattern that wasn't made by hooves or paws. They were long, flat impressions, spaced like human steps but deeper, heavier. They led up the slope. I told myself I would only follow them for a few seconds just to see. I climbed partway up the slope, and that was when I saw something half hidden between the trees. There was a small old fire pit, the stones blackened and cracked from heat. Around it were items left there long ago. Scraps of torn fabric, a rusted metal can, a broken part of a backpack strap. It looked like someone had camped there but left in a hurry. The ground was disturbed in the same heavy pattern I had seen near my tent. A sudden wind moved through the trees, and a cold feeling shot down my spine. I didn't want to explore anymore. I didn't want answers. I walked back down, packed everything in my tent as fast as my hands would move, and didn't even bother rolling things properly. I just stuffed everything into my backpack and left. The walk back to my car felt twice as long as the walk in. Every sound made me turn my head. Every shadow looked like something leaning toward me. When I finally reached the car, I threw everything inside and locked the doors. Only then did I let myself breathe normally again. When I drove away from the forest, I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone standing on the side of the road. Nothing appeared. The woods stayed still behind me, pretending to be harmless. I haven't gone camping alone since that night. I still think about the heavy steps circling the tent, the careful way they moved, and the strange campsite on the slope. I remind myself there were no ghosts, no creatures, nothing supernatural. It was real, something human or something close to human. And that's what makes it worse. Because whatever it was, it knew I was there. It walked around my tent in the dark. It stood only a thin sheet of fabric away from me. And I left without ever knowing if it watched me leave, or if it waited for someone else to wander in just like I did. Someone who thought they were alone. And the worst part is that whenever I think back, I realize that whoever left that old campsite on the slope probably thought the exact same thing. They probably believed they were alone too, until the moment they weren't. The sun was already low when I reached the camping spot deep in the forest. I had chosen this place because it was far away from any trails or other campers. I wanted silence and solitude, just me and the trees. The air smelled fresh and earthy, with the faint scent of pine and damp soil. The ground was soft beneath my boots, and the thick trunks of tall trees rose all around like silent guards. I unpacked slowly, setting up my tent on a small clearing covered with dry leaves. The spot was perfect, flat and shielded by a few bushes and saplings. I pulled out my sleeping bag, laid it inside, and stacked my gear nearby. I had enough food and water for 2 days, a flashlight, matches, a small axe, and a sturdy knife. The sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows through the woods. The forest grew darker and quieter as night approached. Birds stopped singing, and the wind settled into a soft whisper among the branches. I made a small fire with dry sticks and twigs, careful to keep it low. The crackling fire was comforting, and the orange glow warmed the chill in the air. I cooked a simple meal of canned beans heated over the fire and ate slowly, feeling the solitude wrap around me like a heavy blanket. After eating, I sat close to the fire, listening to the small sounds of the night. Insects buzzed, leaves rustled gently, and the occasional snap of a twig echoed far away. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even. I looked up at the stars peeking through the canopy and felt a strange calmness. That calmness shattered just as I was about to crawl into my sleeping bag. A sudden, sharp crack came from behind the trees about 50 feet away. It was loud enough to make me freeze. My heart jumped, but I told myself it was probably a falling branch or an animal moving. The forest was full of creatures, after all. I grabbed my flashlight and swung it slowly over the dark woods. The beam cut through the black, landing on thick tree trunks and underbrush. Nothing moved. I lowered the light and waited. The silence returned, but my skin prickled. Then, another sound, quiet footsteps, slow and deliberate, breaking twigs and rustling leaves. The footsteps circled the clearing, getting closer but always just out of sight behind the trees. My mind raced. This wasn't a deer or a rabbit. Those sounds were heavier, more cautious, like someone trying to stay hidden. I picked up my knife and flashlight, ready to defend myself if needed. Minutes passed, maybe an hour, though it felt like forever. The footsteps stopped just beyond the firelight. Then I heard a low, guttural growl. My body tensed, every muscle tight. I knew bears could growl like that. My campfire wasn't big enough to scare a bear, but I didn't want to make a scene and risk provoking it. I stayed perfectly still, holding my breath, hoping the firelight would keep whatever it was away. The growling stopped abruptly, and the footsteps faded into the darkness. I didn't dare move until I was sure the forest had returned to its usual quiet. That night, I barely slept. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept my knife close and the flashlight on the ground beside my sleeping bag. The cold air pressed against my skin, and I wrapped myself tightly in the sleeping bag, eyes wide open. At first light, I packed everything up in silence, my hands shaking slightly. I wanted to leave but needed to check if my camp was still safe. The fire was out, the ashes cold and gray. I looked around carefully. There were large paw prints near the edge of the clearing, deep and fresh. The claws were visible in the soft soil. It was a bear, and it had been very close. I didn't want to stay another night after that. Bears were dangerous, especially if they felt threatened or if food was around. I grabbed my pack and started hiking back toward the trail, moving fast but carefully. The forest seemed less inviting now, its shadows deeper and its noises harsher. I stuck to the main path, avoiding thick bushes and dark corners. Every sound made me glance over my shoulder. Every shadow looked like a threat. After an hour, I saw the faint outline of a small cabin through the trees. I didn't know if it was occupied, but it was better than the woods. I hurried toward it, hoping for shelter or a sign of people. The cabin was old, with weathered wooden walls and a rusty metal roof. The door was slightly open. Inside, there was a dusty table and some empty chairs, but no people. I found a box of matches and some dry wood in a corner. I lit a small fire in the rusty stove and sat down, trying to calm my nerves. I stayed there until late afternoon, waiting for someone or for help. The sun was low again when I finally saw a group of hikers on the trail. I waved frantically, and they noticed me. I told them about the bear tracks and the noises in the night. They nodded seriously and offered to guide me out. We walked together through the forest, the sounds of the woods less scary with company around. The sun dipped below the trees as we reached the edge of the forest where cars and roads appeared. The city noise felt loud and harsh, but it was a relief. Looking back once more, the forest seemed calm, almost peaceful in the fading light. But I knew the danger had been real and close. The bear had been curious or maybe hungry, and I was lucky it didn't come into the clearing while I slept. That night, safe at home, I thought about the forest and the bear. Nature was wild and unpredictable. No stories or legends, just real animals surviving. It wasn't about ghosts or monsters, but about respect and caution. I had learned that the hard way. Camping alone in the wild was peaceful and beautiful, but it could also be dangerous if you didn't stay alert and understand the risks. From now on, I would never camp in the deep woods without a plan, without someone knowing exactly where I was, and without proper gear to protect myself from the real dangers out there. The forest was no place for mistakes, and I had come very close to paying a high price for one. The first time I went camping alone, I thought it would be a simple break from the noise of everyday life, a chance to breathe fresh air, enjoy the quiet, and maybe catch some peace. I chose a spot deep in the forest, far from the usual trails. The drive had been long, winding through narrow roads flanked by tall trees that seemed to lean inward, like the woods were closing in around me. When I finally parked, the sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows that stretched like dark fingers over the ground. I unloaded my gear carefully: tent, sleeping bag, cooking stove, enough food for 2 days, water, a flashlight, and some extra batteries. I'd been camping before, but never this deep in the woods by myself. Setting up the tent took longer than I expected, the ground uneven and covered in dry leaves that rustled when the wind brushed them. I found a spot sheltered by a cluster of pines. Their thick trunks gave me some comfort. I knew I was off the beaten path. No marked trails, no signs of other campers. After setting up, I gathered some firewood, dry sticks and small branches that snapped easily between my fingers. The sun vanished behind the trees, and the air turned colder quickly. Darkness came fast in the forest. I managed to light the fire with a couple of matches, the flame catching on dry bark and flickering with a weak orange glow. I sat close to it, warming my hands and eating a cold sandwich I had packed. The forest was alive with noises: crackling leaves, distant birds settling in for the night, the sharp chirping of insects. The sounds were oddly loud in the stillness. As night deepened, the fire shrank down to glowing embers. I zipped up in my sleeping bag, leaning against the tent wall, listening to the woods. That's when I first heard it. A faint snapping noise, like a branch breaking somewhere not far from me. I stayed still, straining my ears. Nothing else. Probably a deer, I told myself. The forest was full of animals. But then the snapping came again, closer this time. And then a soft crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. Not the light, quick steps of a small animal. This was heavier, slower. I turned on my flashlight and scanned the dark trees around me, but the beam only hit trunks and thick shadows. No movement. I told myself to calm down, that it was probably a raccoon or a fox. Still, the sound kept coming, moving around my camp. My heart started to beat faster, but I didn't want to leave the fire or my tent unguarded. The forest felt huge and silent except for those footsteps. I grabbed a sturdy stick, holding it tight in my hands, ready to defend myself if needed. The sounds circled me, staying just out of sight, but never crossing into the firelight. Then came another noise, a low grunt, almost like an animal's growl, but deeper and more human-like. My skin crawled. I thought about the warnings I'd heard about bears in the area, but I knew bear attacks were rare, and usually they avoided humans. Still, the thought of a large wild animal nearby made every muscle tense. I checked my phone. No signal, no way to call for help. I was truly alone. The footsteps stopped suddenly. The forest fell quiet again. I kept the flashlight on and stared into the dark trees for what felt like hours, but I didn't see anything else. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I blew out the fire and crawled into the tent, leaving the flashlight on low by my side. Sleep came in fits, broken by every little noise. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf, sent jolts of fear through me. At one point, I thought I saw a shadow move past the tent's mesh window. I froze, barely breathing, gripping my stick. Then nothing, just the wind shaking the leaves. Morning came with a dull gray sky and cold, damp air. I packed up quickly, wanting to leave this place behind. As I was taking down the tent, I noticed something strange near the edge of the clearing. Footprints in the soft earth, large and heavy. They weren't deer or any small animal. The prints looked like they belonged to a person wearing heavy boots. That sent a chill through me. I'd been alone, but maybe not as alone as I thought. Someone had been nearby, watching or following me. The thought made my skin crawl. I decided to take a different route back, sticking close to a small creek I found, hoping to avoid any trail someone else might use. The woods still felt quiet, but I kept looking over my shoulder, the prints fresh in my mind. As I walked, I spotted broken branches and crushed leaves, marks that looked like someone or something had passed through recently. The forest felt alive in a way that wasn't peaceful. Felt like it was watching, waiting. Finally, after hours of walking, I reached a dirt road and saw a car in the distance. Relief hit me hard. I broke into a run and didn't stop until I was inside, locked doors and windows. Later, I learned from the park rangers that this area was sometimes used by hunters and off-the-grid people who avoided contact. There were warnings about strange, sometimes dangerous people who roamed those woods, but no official reports. No one talked much about it, but the ranger said I was lucky to get out without trouble. I realized the noises I heard weren't wild animals. They were people, and they were close. I had unknowingly camped near where someone had been living or hiding, and they didn't want to be found. That experience changed how I see the woods. It's not just nature out there. Sometimes there are people quiet, hidden, watching. And sometimes it's safer to stay far away from places that feel too empty, too silent, or too wild. I don't camp alone anymore, and I always check the area carefully before setting up. The forest is beautiful, but it's not always safe, especially when you're alone and unseen eyes are nearby. That night was the closest I ever came to danger without even knowing it, and I'm still glad I made it out without any harm. The woods taught me a harsh lesson. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't what you imagine, but what you don't see. I headed out to the woods because I needed a break from everything. I told myself it would only be one night, maybe two, just enough to clear my head. I picked a random spot deep in the forest, far from the usual campsites. It was the kind of place that felt untouched, where the trees stood close together, and the air felt cooler and heavier. The ground was uneven, covered with old pine needles, fallen branches, and patches of damp soil that smelled earthy and cold. I walked around for a bit until I found a small flat area tucked between thick bushes and a tall dead tree that leaned slightly to the side like it had been frozen mid-fall years ago. I set up my tent slowly, taking my time, securing every peg deeper than usual because the ground felt soft in a strange way, almost like it had been disturbed recently. The forest was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a silence that was forced, as if everything out there had stopped moving and was listening. Even the wind barely touched the tops of the trees. I tried not to think much about it. I kept telling myself it was just a random patch of woods. Forests always had strange pockets of quiet. By the time I made a small fire, the sky had already turned a dull orange, fading fast. I ate a simple meal, something quick, something warm. I sat there for a long time staring into the flames, letting the heat touch my face while my back felt cold from the night air settling around me. I tried to relax, but something in the atmosphere felt off. There was a strange tightness in the air, like everything around me was waiting. When darkness came fully, it came fast. The trees swallowed the last bit of light, and the fire became the only thing that kept the area around me visible. The shadows from the flames moved in slow waves across the bushes, bending and stretching with every crackle of the wood. I kept glancing at them without meaning to, expecting something to step out even though I didn't hear anything. Then the first faint sound came. It was small but sharp, like a quick snap of a twig under weight. I froze. My hands stopped moving, and I tried to tell myself it was an animal. But the sound wasn't random or scattered. It came once. Then, after a few long minutes of silence, another soft snap echoed from deeper in the dark. It didn't sound like a wandering animal stepping without care. It sounded like something moving slowly, placing its weight carefully. I sat there, trying to breathe normally, but every muscle in my body felt tight. I kept my eyes locked on the dark spot between two thick trees. It felt like something was there, even though the fire wasn't bright enough to show me more than vague shapes. For a long time, nothing else happened. The only movements came from the fire and the occasional shifting of leaves when the wind finally started to pick up again. I tried to let it go. I tried to shake it off, but that tight feeling in my chest didn't go away. After a while, I decided to get into my tent. I told myself the thin walls would at least make me feel like I had some barrier between me and the outside. I zipped the tent shut and lay down on my sleeping bag, listening to every little sound. The fabric of the tent moved slightly with the breeze, making soft taps and creaks. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I couldn't see anything except faint shadows from the firelight outside. Then something happened that made the hair on my arms rise. I heard a soft but clear shift in the dirt, right outside the tent. Not fast, not loud, not accidental. It sounded like someone stepping slowly, trying hard not to be noticed. Then another step, another shift, and then silence again. I didn't move. I didn't breathe for a moment. My mind raced with every possible explanation, but none of them made sense. I wasn't near any trails. I hadn't seen a single person since arriving, and the steps were too controlled, too slow, too deliberate to be any animal I could think of. For almost an hour, nothing else happened. The fire crackled less and less as it died down. The forest outside went silent again. Eventually, the temperature dropped more, and the cold seeped through the tent floor into my back. I tried to stay awake, but my body was exhausted. I drifted in and out of light sleep, never fully resting, always half listening. Sometime deep into the night, I woke up to another sound. This one wasn't from the ground. It was above me, up in the trees. A fast, rough scraping sound like something climbing. Claws or shoes or hands gripping bark. Something heavy moving upward. It moved quickly, too quickly for the shaky light coming from the last ember of the fire to reveal anything. Then another sound followed from a different tree, not far from the first. Something else climbing, or the same thing moving between trees. I lay there frozen, staring at the ceiling of the tent, feeling completely helpless. I could hear the branches shift under weight, wood creaking lightly. Whatever was out there was higher than the tent now, moving just above the campsite. Then it stopped. No climbing, no shifting, nothing, just silence again. That silence lasted a long time, long enough that I started counting seconds in my head just to keep from losing control. At some point, the air changed. I could feel it through the tent fabric. A soft pressure, like something was directly above me, blocking the faint warmth from the sky. My heartbeat was so fast I felt dizzy. I didn't move the rest of the night. When the first light of morning appeared, I waited even longer just to be safe. Only when the sun was fully up did I unzip the tent. What I saw made the entire night make sense in the worst way. The ground around the tent was disturbed, not by random steps, but by careful, deliberate ones. Footprints, bare footprints. They circled the tent in slow, tight loops, like whoever made them had walked around me again and again, watching, waiting. The footprints led toward the trees, stopping right at the base of the tall ones I heard the scraping from. The bark on those trees had long, fresh marks going upward. Someone had been there. Someone had climbed above me and stayed there. I packed everything as fast as I could, not even stopping to eat or rest. I didn't look back at the trees. I didn't follow the tracks. I just left. When I reached the road hours later, I felt the sunlight in a way I never had before. It felt like safety, like distance, like something human again. I didn't need to guess what happened that night. I knew someone had been watching me from the moment I arrived at that random spot. Maybe they'd been living out there. Maybe they followed strangers. Maybe they waited for people who camped alone. All I knew was that leaving when I did, without stepping outside during the night, was the reason I was able to walk out of those woods alive. I reached the campsite late in the afternoon, the kind of hour where the sun hangs low and warm, but you can already feel the cold waiting behind the trees. I had taken a long path through a forest I didn't really know, but it seemed quiet and peaceful at first, and that calm pulled me in. I had wanted a break from everything, just a few days alone, away from noise and people and stress. I picked a small patch of ground near a thin stream that ran over flat stones, making a soft sound that felt nice to hear. The trees around the spot were tall and close together, and their shadows stretched long over the ground. Even in daylight, the forest felt tight, like it pressed in toward me. I set up my tent slowly, taking my time because being alone meant there was no rush. The ground was cool and slightly damp when I pushed the stakes in. My hands smelled like pine from touching branches while clearing the area. I spread out my sleeping bag inside and then stepped out to gather extra firewood. While walking, I noticed how uneven the ground was. Roots twisted out everywhere, some almost high enough to trip me. The forest floor was covered in old leaves that crunched under my boots. Every time I stepped, the sound felt louder than it should have. I kept turning my head because I thought I heard something follow the rhythm of my steps, but when I stopped, the sound stopped too. I tried to tell myself it was just leaves falling or animals settling in for the night. As the sun slid behind the tree line, the temperature dropped fast. The air became sharp and cold, and my breath fogged out in front of me. I sat by the small fire I built, warming my hands. The light flickered on the trunks around me, making them look like tall figures standing in silence. The forest had a way of making the night feel heavier than usual. The smell of smoke mixed with the damp earth, and the stream's soft sound almost disappeared as everything else went quiet. It wasn't peaceful quiet. It was the kind that feels like something is waiting. When darkness fully settled in, I ate a little food, then rested in the tent. The ground felt harder than I expected. I lay on my back and stared at the fabric above me, watching shadows from the fire flicker across it. The outside air moved through the trees in small gusts, making branches knock together. For a while it was normal, just typical forest sounds. Then everything changed. I heard something heavy step on the leaves outside. Not quick steps, not the light movement of a small animal. It sounded slow and careful, pressing weight into the ground. The fire outside crackled softly, but the sound of the steps cut through it clearly. I stayed still, my breathing slow, trying to make sense of it. I told myself it could be a deer, maybe even a large one. But then the steps stopped right near the tent, close enough that I could feel the faint vibration through the ground. The night was so silent that I could hear my heartbeat. I waited. Nothing moved. The fire popped once and I flinched. Then I heard the sound again. Something brushing lightly against the side of the tent. Not a strong push, more like a slow drag. The fabric shifted just a little, like someone or something was touching it with their fingers or claws or maybe even a piece of wood. It was impossible to tell. The noise was soft but too controlled, too deliberate to be wind. My mouth felt dry. I stared at the fabric, waiting to see a shape press through it, but nothing did. Just that soft dragging sound that stopped, then started again a few seconds later, slow and steady. I held my breath without meaning to, afraid that even a small noise from me would change whatever was happening outside. After a long minute, the dragging stopped completely, but the feeling of being watched stayed. I didn't dare unzip the tent. I didn't even move my legs. I stayed in the same position until my muscles hurt. Eventually, the fire outside burned low and the shadows on the tent disappeared. The darkness outside felt deeper. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, but it wasn't real sleep. It was the kind where your mind keeps waking you up because it doesn't trust anything. When the gray light of morning finally pushed through the tent fabric, I stepped outside and looked around. The air was cold and thin. Nothing looked wrong at first. The fire had died into soft ashes. The trees were quiet again. But then I noticed the ground. There were marks around my tent. Not footprints, not exactly. More like disturbed patches of leaves shaped in odd curves and lines, like something heavy had moved around slowly while keeping close. Some areas looked pressed down in a long, smooth way, as if something had been lying low while circling the tent. The dragging marks along the side of the tent were real too thin, straight lines where the dust on the fabric had been brushed away. I tried not to think too deeply. I packed my things slowly, telling myself I had overreacted in the night. But as I started walking back through the forest, I kept hearing small snaps behind me, twigs breaking, leaves shifting. Every time I turned, nothing moved. But the forest didn't feel empty. The shadows between the trees felt thicker than they should. I kept imagining something ducking behind the trunks, watching me. The deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt. The path seemed different from the day before. Certain trees looked unfamiliar. For a moment, I thought I had walked in a circle, even though I had tried to be careful. I kept pushing forward until I found the stream again. Relief hit me hard, because once I followed the water, I knew I'd reach the main trail. But that relief didn't last long. I saw fresh marks by the stream, long, smooth impressions in the mud, almost like someone had knelt there, but too wide and too deep. The mud still glistened, meaning the marks were new. Something had been near the stream only minutes before I arrived. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't stop for anything. I followed the water until the trees finally opened up and I reached the start of the trail. Only then did I feel safe enough to breathe normally again. I walked fast until I reached the parking area. My hands were shaking when I opened the car door. When I drove away, the forest looked calm from the outside, almost peaceful. But I knew what I had heard. I knew something large had moved around my tent in the dark. Something that didn't run like a normal animal would. Something that moved slow and close like it was studying me. The clear ending is simple. I never went back to that forest again. I didn't report it, I didn't try to figure out what it was. Some things don't need an explanation to feel real. And whatever was out there wasn't a ghost, wasn't a monster from a story. It was something living. Something that was comfortable moving right up to where I slept. Something that didn't fear humans at all. That fact alone was enough to make me stay away forever. The night I spent in those woods is something I'll never forget. I still get chills thinking about it, even years later. It wasn't the kind of fear that comes from some ghost story or made-up monster. No, it was raw, real, and bone-deep. The kind of fear that happens when something very human, very alive, is out there, and you're completely alone. It all started with a simple plan. I wanted to get away from everything, from the noise of the city and the constant pressure of work. I grabbed my backpack, some food, water, and basic camping gear, and drove out to a forest a few hours away. The place was remote, barely marked on any map, but it looked perfect. Tall trees, thick underbrush, and a small creek running through it. I wanted to camp near that creek. I arrived late afternoon and spent the next hour walking deeper into the forest. The air smelled fresh, pine and damp earth mixing together. Birds chirped lazily, and the sun filtered through the leaves, casting long shadows. I picked a spot near the creek, flat enough for my tent, and started setting up. The sounds of the water running over rocks were calming, and for a while, I felt at peace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I lit a small campfire. The crackling flames were warm against the growing chill. I ate some of my food, just simple stuff like a sandwich and some nuts, and then sat back, watching the stars start to appear in the darkening sky. But then, as the fire flickered, I noticed something strange. The forest wasn't as quiet as I thought. There was a low rustling from the bushes nearby. At first, I thought it was just a small animal, maybe a raccoon or a fox. I didn't think much of it until I heard the sound again, closer this time. Something was moving slowly but deliberately just beyond the firelight. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the noise, but I didn't see anything, just dark shapes and leaves moving. I told myself it was nothing, probably a deer or something. I tried to ignore it and focused on keeping the fire alive. But the rustling didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. It wasn't the quick, nervous scurry of a small animal. It was slow, careful, like something was watching me and trying not to be seen. I froze. My heart started pounding. The forest suddenly felt huge and empty at the same time, like I was the only living thing out there. Then I heard it. A low sound, almost like a growl, but it wasn't an animal growl. It was rougher, deeper, more human-like. It wasn't coming from one spot, but all around me, mixed with the rustling. I realized I wasn't alone. Something was out there with me. I grabbed my pocket knife, the only thing I had for protection, and stood up, shining the flashlight in all directions. The beam caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting behind a tree. Whatever it wasn't an animal. The size and speed didn't fit any wild creature I knew from the area. It felt like someone or something was stalking me. Panic started to set in. I knew I had to leave, but the thought of walking out there in the dark with something unknown around was terrifying. I tried to stay calm and packed up my tent quickly, my hands shaking. I didn't want to run, knowing that would give away my position, but I needed to get out of there fast. I decided to follow the creek upstream, hoping it would lead me back to the road. The water made a steady noise, something I could use to guide myself in the dark. I kept my flashlight pointed forward, scanning for any sign of movement. Then I heard footsteps, heavy, slow steps on dry leaves. They weren't mine. They were behind me, matching my pace but not quite close enough to see. I didn't dare look back. My breath came out in short gasps. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but I forced myself to keep moving steadily. The footsteps kept following me for what felt like hours, though it could have only been minutes. The forest seemed to close in tighter, the trees blocking out the moonlight, the underbrush snagging at my clothes and scratching my skin. Suddenly, I tripped over a root and fell hard on the ground. Pain shot through my knee, sharp and burning. The flashlight flew from my hand and landed a few feet away, casting a dim circle of light. That's when I heard it clear breathing. Heavy, rough breathing right next to me. I scrambled backward, trying to grab the flashlight, and finally managed to catch it. I swung the light wildly toward the sound, and for a split second, I saw a man. He was tall, wearing dirty clothes, his face grim and covered with dirt and scratches. His eyes were wild, desperate. No words, no explanation, just watching me. I didn't hesitate. I got up and ran as fast as I could, stumbling through the forest, following the creek. I didn't look back once. I ran until I burst out of the trees onto a dirt road, breathless and bleeding from scraped knees and hands. I didn't stop until I found a passing car, flagged it down, and told them to call the police. The officers said they'd searched the forest but never found anyone. They told me there was a man living rough in those woods, someone who avoided people and could be dangerous. They called him a drifter, a man who'd been missing from the nearby town for weeks. I realized then I had stumbled into his territory, and he had probably been watching me for a while before I even noticed. That night taught me something about fear, real fear. It isn't about monsters or ghosts. It's about the real, living dangers out there. A man lost in the woods can be far scarier than any story. And when you're alone, surrounded by trees and darkness, the line between safety and danger can break in an instant. I never went camping alone after that. I never went back to that forest. It was a harsh reminder that nature isn't always peaceful and that sometimes the scariest things are the ones with flesh and blood. I decided to go camping alone in the middle of a large forest. It wasn't my first time out there, but this time something felt different. I chose a spot deep inside, far from the usual trails because I wanted quiet and to be away from people. The forest was dense, with tall trees stretching high, their thick branches blocking much of the sky. The ground was covered with fallen leaves, pine needles, and patches of moss. It smelled fresh but also had that strange earthy scent you only find deep in untouched woods. I arrived late in the afternoon after hiking for hours with my backpack loaded with all the essentials. A small tent, a sleeping bag, a camping stove, food, water, a flashlight, and a first aid kit. The sun was already low, casting long shadows between the trees. I found a clearing that looked perfect for setting up camp. It wasn't too big, but enough space for my tent and a small fire pit. The ground was firm but soft enough for my tent stakes to hold. I spent the next hour gathering dry wood and twigs for the fire. The forest was quiet except for the occasional chirping of birds and the rustling of small animals in the bushes. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky turned a deep blue. I built the fire carefully, stacking the wood just right. Once it caught flame, the warm orange light pushed back the darkness around me, and the crackling sound of burning wood filled the air. I sat close to the fire, eating some canned beans and crackers, enjoying the silence. After eating, I cleaned up a little and double-checked my gear. The forest at night is very different from during the day. The shadows seemed longer, and the noises changed. The birds stopped singing, replaced by the distant hoot of an owl or the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. I stayed near the fire, trying to keep my mind calm and relaxed. But as the night deepened, I started to notice something. Around the edge of the clearing, in the dense darkness of the trees, there was movement. Small, quick flickers of something passing between the trees. I told myself it was just the wind pushing branches or some small animals, maybe rabbits or raccoons, but the movement was too deliberate and slow. I could feel eyes watching me, but whenever I looked directly, nothing was there. I grabbed my flashlight and shone the beam into the darkness, sweeping it slowly over the tree line. The light passed over nothing but trees and thick undergrowth. Still, that feeling didn't go away. I was not alone, and whatever was out there wasn't scared of me. Hours passed, and I tried to stay awake, knowing I had to stay alert. The fire was getting low, so I added more wood, keeping the flames bright. Then I heard it, a heavy, slow breathing coming from just beyond the firelight. My heart jumped into my throat. The breathing was deep and low, almost like someone or something was right there in the dark. I couldn't see it, but the sound was clear, steady, and close. I held my breath and looked around carefully. The fire's light flickered across the clearing, but the trees stayed black and silent. The breathing stopped suddenly. There was a long pause. Then, from behind a large tree about 20 feet away, a figure stepped out into the firelight. It wasn't a ghost or monster, just a man. His clothes were dirty and torn, and he looked tired and hungry. His face was rough with stubble, and his eyes were wild. I realized he must have been lost in the woods for days. My first thought was to help him, but something about him made me uneasy. He didn't say a word, just stared at me. His presence felt tense and dangerous. I slowly reached for my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. I was completely isolated. The man took a step closer, then stopped. I noticed the cut on his arm, raw and bleeding. I understood he might need medical help, but I was also scared he might attack me or take my supplies. He suddenly turned and disappeared into the darkness, moving with strange ease through the trees. I waited a few minutes, listening hard, but he didn't come back. The heavy breathing and movement had stopped. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. I realized I couldn't stay there all night. If he was still around, he could come back anytime, and I would be completely vulnerable. I packed up quickly but quietly, trying not to make noise that would draw him back. My heart was pounding as I grabbed my backpack and started walking through the woods, following the faint trail I had come on earlier. The forest felt alive with danger. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting the man to appear again. I knew the forest well, but the dark made everything confusing and easy to get lost in. The path I followed twisted and turned, and after an hour or so, I could no longer tell if I was still on the right trail. I stopped to catch my breath and listened. No footsteps, no breathing, just the wind moving through the trees. Slowly, I felt some of the tension leave my body. I was alone again, and I was safe. But I knew that man was still out there, somewhere, lost and desperate. Eventually, I found a small logging road I had passed earlier that led back to the main highway. It was quiet, empty, but it was a way out. I kept walking until I saw the faint glow of headlights in the distance. Relief washed over me like a wave. I knew help was close. When I finally reached a gas station a few miles away, I called the local authorities and told them what happened. They promised to send a search party for the lost man. I never saw him again, but sometimes I wonder if he made it out or if the forest claimed him. That night taught me how real and raw danger in the wilderness can be. No ghosts or monsters, just people and nature, unpredictable and sometimes terrifying in their own way. The woods are not a place for careless travelers, and even familiar paths can lead to fear you never expect. I went camping alone in late autumn, hoping the cold air and the quiet woods would clear my head for a few days. I picked a random place on the map, a small patch of forest near an old logging road that barely showed up on satellite images. The trees there looked dense, the kind of place where branches knit together so tightly that even sunlight has trouble pushing through. That was what I wanted. Silence, space, a place where nothing would bother me. I started hiking in the afternoon, carrying enough gear for 3 nights. The air felt sharp when I breathed. Most of the leaves had already dropped, so every step I took made a crisp sound that echoed around me. The deeper I went, the more closed in the forest felt. Thin bare branches stuck out like broken bones. The dirt was dry, the smell of cold soil rising with each footstep. After half an hour, I was far enough from the road that I couldn't hear anything except wind and the weak rustling of whatever small animals were still awake for the season. I found a small clearing that looked flat enough to set my tent. It wasn't perfect, but I didn't care. I felt tired already, even though the sun still hung low above the tree line. I set my bag down, stretched my shoulders, and started setting up camp. The wind kept moving the tent fabric, making it snap and shiver. I hammered the stakes deeper until everything felt tight and secure. When I finally stepped back and looked at my setup, something about the area felt slightly off. It wasn't anything big. It was just the stillness. The way the trees around the clearing leaned inward, almost like they were paying attention. I tried to ignore that feeling. I unpacked my food, lit a small fire, and heated a simple meal. As the fire burned, the warmth felt good, but the shadows around me looked harsh and stretched out, like they were reaching in toward the flames. I focused on the sound of the firewood cracking. The light bounced off the trunks, but the forest behind them stayed dark, the kind of dark that felt thick and heavy. When night came fully, the temperature dropped fast. I crawled into my tent, zipped myself inside the sleeping bag, and closed my eyes. For a while, everything seemed normal. My breathing slowed. The fabric of the tent barely moved. I could hear the distant hum of wind passing above the trees. But just when I started to drift off, I heard something soft in the woods. It wasn't footsteps at first. It was more like something brushing against fallen leaves. Light, slow, almost testing the ground. I kept my eyes closed at first, thinking it was a small animal. Rabbits or stray foxes sometimes made sounds like that. But then the noise got heavier, more deliberate, more controlled. The steps weren't chaotic like an animal's. They were spread out, timed. Someone or something bigger than an animal was walking, but trying not to be heard. A slow pressure built in my chest. I opened my eyes inside the tent, staring at the weak outline of the fabric lit faintly by the moon. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The steps came closer. Not fast, not running, just slow and steady, like whoever was out there didn't need to hurry. The weight of each step was clear now, crushing thin twigs, shifting layers of dry leaves. I held still until the steps stopped completely. The silence that followed felt thick. I could hear nothing except my heartbeat. My tent was thin, so thin I felt like anything outside could sense me through it. I waited, counting the seconds, but I had no idea if the thing was 10 feet away or standing right outside the fabric. Then I heard a small, sharp crack, like someone stepped on a branch but tried to shift their weight off it too late. My whole body tensed. I stayed awake like that for what felt like hours. Eventually, the forest went silent again. I never heard the steps move away. It was like whoever or whatever made them simply stopped and waited. I stayed frozen until the sky started to lighten. When morning finally came, I stepped outside my tent with my heart already racing. The air felt frozen, and my breath came out in thick white clouds. I checked the ground around my campsite, expecting to see prints. At first, I didn't notice anything. The soil was dry, and the leaves made things hard to track. But when I walked a few steps toward the trees, I saw something that made my stomach twist. There were footprints. Not huge, but definitely human. Clear heel marks, clear impressions from a shoe. They came from deeper in the forest and stopped just a few meters from my tent. But there were no prints leading away. The ground around the area was untouched except for the set coming in. Whoever was watching me had stood there in the dark, close enough to reach the tent if they wanted, and then somehow left without leaving any signs. The idea that someone had been standing in the dark, silent, watching me while I slept made the air around me feel wrong. I kept looking behind trees, expecting to see someone hiding and waiting. My skin crawled. I packed my things fast, stuffing everything into the bag with shaking hands. The whole time I kept glancing at the tree line. When I started hiking back toward the road, every sound made me freeze. The forest felt different, not empty this time, but occupied, as if the stranger who left those footprints was still somewhere nearby, following me slowly, keeping distance but never losing sight. I walked faster than I ever did with a full pack. The trail back felt longer than before, like the forest wanted to keep me inside it. When I finally reached the logging road, I felt my body loosen for the first time since the night. My heart still pounded, but the open space made me feel like I had escaped something. I kept walking until I reached my car. The air near the road felt normal again, lighter somehow, but the woods behind me stayed silent. I could feel the weight of the trees watching. I didn't look back. I got into the car, locked the doors, and drove away fast. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station miles away, where I sat inside the car for a long time, letting myself finally breathe. Whatever or whoever stood near my tent that night wasn't an animal, and it wasn't a ghost or anything unreal. It was a human, and the scariest part was the intention behind those footsteps. The slow, careful way they moved, the silent way they left. The thought that someone had walked into the deep woods just to stand in the dark and watch a stranger sleep. That was the last time I ever camped alone. I still think about those footprints, how they came in but never went out. I still think about whoever was standing there quietly, close enough to touch my tent. And I still think about how easily they let me leave, like they chose not to do anything that night. And knowing that someone made that choice is the part that stays with me the most. I started that trip because I wanted a break from everything. I had been working too much, sleeping too little, and staring at screens for so long that my eyes felt like they were burning. I wanted quiet. I wanted empty space. I wanted to feel something real again, something that wasn't made of concrete or noise. So I picked a random camping spot on the map, a place deep inside a forest I had never visited before. It looked normal on the satellite view, nothing special, just endless trees, a river cutting through the middle, and a small clearing a few miles off a dirt road. It felt perfect because it didn't look like anything at all. The drive there took most of the morning. The road kept getting narrower until I wasn't even sure it was a road anymore. Trees pushed close on both sides, their branches scraping against the car like fingers trailing along metal. When I finally reached a spot wide enough to pull over, I checked the map and realized I would have to walk almost 2 miles through thick woods to reach the clearing. That was fine. I wanted to be alone, and the more steps I put between myself and the car, the better I felt. The air was cold and sharp, and the forest was quiet in that heavy way that feels like something is holding its breath. I could hear only my own boots crushing old leaves and the slow hum of the river somewhere ahead. The trail wasn't really a trail, just a faint line on the ground that looked like deer or other animals had walked it before. Every step felt like I was heading deeper into a place that wasn't really meant for people, but that was the whole point. When I finally reached the clearing, the sun was halfway down the sky. It was a perfect circle of open space, surrounded by tall pines and thick brush. The ground was soft with moss and layers of old needles. The river wasn't far, maybe a 2-minute walk through the trees, and I liked the idea of hearing running water while I slept. I set up my tent, gathered wood, and settled in as the daylight slipped away. The first sign that something felt wrong came as I was collecting firewood. I found a small tree stump near the edge of the clearing. I noticed deep marks in it, long and sharp, cutting straight through the bark like something heavy had slammed into it more than once. At first I thought it was from an axe, but the lines were uneven and too wild, as if someone had swung without control. They weren't clean cuts. They looked angry, fresh too. The wood beneath was pale and untouched by weather. I tried to ignore it. People left strange things behind in the woods all the time. Hunters, kids, whoever. I pushed the thought away and focused on getting the fire going before the cold settled in. When night finally took over, the forest shifted. It was the same place, but everything felt heavier, closer, almost like the trees themselves were leaning toward the firelight. The river's sound changed too. It didn't sound calm anymore. It sounded rough, like something big kept moving through it every few minutes. I kept looking toward the sound, waiting to see an animal step into view, but nothing ever did. As the temperature dropped, I put more wood on the fire and tried to relax. I kept telling myself nothing was wrong. I had camped alone plenty of times. Darkness always made things seem worse than they were. But then I heard something that didn't fit into any normal explanation. It was the sound of footsteps moving around the clearing. Slow, heavy ones. They didn't snap twigs or crush leaves loudly, but I could feel them through the ground, like small dull thuds. I sat still, my hands tight on my knees, staring past the fire into the black shapes between the trees. The footsteps circled the clearing once, then twice, keeping a steady distance from the light. I wanted to believe it was an animal, but animals don't move in perfect circles. Animals wander. Animals rush or hesitate. This thing moved like it knew exactly where it wanted to be. The footsteps stopped. Nothing moved. The forest went back to that thick silence that felt like a warning. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching me. Not close, but near enough to step in if the fire died. So I kept the fire alive, feeding it slowly, never letting it get too low. Hours passed like that, my mind stuck between fear and trying not to think at all. When morning finally arrived, I stepped out of the tent and walked around the clearing. That's when I saw the prints in the moss near the trees. They weren't from boots. They weren't from any animal I recognized either. They were long, narrow impressions, spaced like something walked with weight but lifted its feet carefully. There were no claw marks, no clear shape, just pressed earth in a line that circled the whole clearing. I followed them until the trail ended at the tree with the strange cuts. The prints stopped right in front of it. That was enough to make me pack up, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't want to run or make mistakes. I moved everything back into my backpack, making sure nothing was left. The whole time I packed, I kept feeling like I wasn't alone, like something was watching from behind the wall of trees. I didn't see anything, but I could feel it. It felt real enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. The walk back to the car felt much longer than the walk in. Every sound made me stop. Every shift of branches made me tight in the chest. I kept seeing movement far off in the woods, just small motions, like a shadow slipping behind a tree or something low moving through the brush. I never caught a clear look, but I didn't need one. I could feel it following me, keeping distance but never leaving. When I finally reached the road, I wasn't even sure if my car would still be there. For a second, I imagined seeing more of those strange prints around it, or the windows smashed or something worse. But it was fine. Everything looked normal. The woods around it looked normal too, which almost felt like a trick. I threw my gear inside, started the engine, and drove without stopping until the road widened and the forest thinned out. Even then, I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see something step out onto the dirt road behind me. When I reached home later that night, the fear didn't fade. It sat with me heavy and cold. I kept thinking about those prints circling the clearing, the way they stopped right at the tree with the angry cuts. I kept thinking about the slow footsteps I felt through the ground and the movement I sensed behind me on the walk back. Nothing supernatural happened. Nothing impossible. That's what makes it worse. Something was out there. Something real. Something that didn't want to be seen but wanted me to know it was there. And the part that still keeps me awake is the thought that it followed me longer than I realized. That maybe the moment I stepped out of those woods, it didn't just turn around and leave. Maybe it learned me, my scent, my steps, the way I move. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is still, I swear I hear those slow, heavy footsteps again. Far away, but getting closer, like they've been searching a long time and are finally starting to find their way back to me. I decided to go camping alone for a few days. I needed a break from everything: work, noise, people. So I packed my gear and drove to a remote forest I had found on an old map. The place was deep in the mountains, far from any roads or towns. The trees were thick, the air was fresh and cold, and the silence was so complete it almost felt heavy. I wanted to be alone with nature, just me and the wilderness. The first day went well. I set up my tent near a small creek, gathered some firewood, and made a fire to cook my dinner. The forest around me was calm but alive. The sound of water flowing, birds calling, leaves rustling in the light wind. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped fast, and the night crept in. I lay down in my sleeping bag, warm from the fire, feeling peaceful. But then, just as I was about to close my eyes, I heard something. A faint rustling, coming from the trees not far from my camp. I froze. It was quiet, but something was moving. I stared into the darkness outside my tent. The fire had mostly died down, just a few glowing embers left. The rustling continued, slow and careful. It didn't sound like a bird or an insect. It was heavier, like footsteps on dry leaves. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal. But the noise didn't go away. In fact, it seemed to get closer. The forest felt suddenly much darker, as if the trees were closing in. My heart started to beat faster. I tried to listen harder, but all I could hear was my breathing and the crackling of the fire. The rustling stopped for a moment. Then, I heard a low sound, almost like a growl, but not quite. It was too soft to be a normal animal, and the tone was wrong for any of the usual forest creatures I knew. I was alone out here, no one else for miles. The feeling in my chest changed. It wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, a warning that something was wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent slowly. The cold night air hit me immediately. I shone the light toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on some branches shaking gently, but nothing was there. I stepped out, trying to stay calm, telling myself to check the area. I moved quietly, trying to spot anything unusual. The ground was covered with dry leaves, broken branches, and footprints from animals. But then I saw something that made me stop. There were fresh footprints in the dirt, too big and heavy for a deer or any small animal. They looked like human footprints, boots, deep impressions, heading away from my camp toward the deeper forest. I knew I hadn't seen anyone else come this far. The trail to my camp was tough to follow, and I was certain no one had passed by during the day. Whoever left these footprints was still out there, nearby. My mind raced. Should I pack up and leave now? Should I call for help? But my phone had no signal, and leaving in the dark on unknown paths was dangerous too. I decided to watch carefully, stay quiet, and wait for daylight. The rest of the night was long and cold. I stayed awake, listening to every sound, shining my flashlight every now and then. The rustling came back occasionally, always at the edge of the trees, never clear. At one point, I heard heavy breathing, far enough away that I couldn't tell where it was exactly. Felt like someone was watching me. When dawn finally came, I was exhausted but relieved. The sunlight made the forest feel safer. I packed my things quickly, deciding not to stay another night. Before leaving, I looked again at the footprints. They had not moved far since the night before. As I started walking back to the main trail, I heard a crack behind me. I stopped and turned sharply, but saw nothing but trees and bushes. My heart pounded again. I kept moving, faster now, not daring to look back. When I reached the trail, I saw fresh footprints there too, larger and deeper than normal hiking boots. Someone had been following me for hours, maybe since I arrived. It hit me then how vulnerable I had been. Alone, in the dark, in the middle of nowhere with a stranger nearby. I finally reached the parking lot where I had left my car. I was shaking as I locked the doors and started the engine. I kept looking in the mirrors, half expecting to see someone running after me. But there was no one. Driving away, I felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief to be safe, but anger at how careless I had been. The forest wasn't just nature. It was wild and unpredictable, and there were people out there I didn't know. People who might not have good intentions. After that trip, I never went camping alone again. I learned the hard way that being alone in the wilderness is not just about fighting the elements or wild animals. Sometimes the scariest thing is knowing someone else is out there, watching, waiting, maybe following you, and you don't even know why. The story ended clearly for me. I made it out safe because I stayed alert and calm, but the experience left a mark. Real fear is not about monsters or ghosts. It's about real threats you can't always see, and being alone when those threats are close. That night in the forest taught me to respect that silence and darkness, and to always be prepared for more than just nature. I set out on a solo camping trip deep in the wilderness, hoping to escape the noise of the city and find some peace. The area I chose was a dense forest with tall pine trees, far from any roads or towns. I wanted to challenge myself to live off the land for a couple of days. I packed light but carefully: tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small stove, and a good knife. The plan was simple. Hike about 5 miles into the forest, set up camp near a stream, and spend 2 nights there before heading back. The hike in was rougher than I expected. The trail wasn't well marked, and fallen trees blocked my path more than once. The sun was starting to dip as I finally found a clearing near the sound of flowing water. The stream was small but steady, perfect for fresh water. I set up my tent in a flat spot, surrounded by thick bushes and tall trees. The ground was damp but firm. After pitching the tent, I gathered dry wood for a fire. The smell of pine and wet earth filled the air, and I felt a quiet calm settle over me. That first night, the forest felt alive in a way I hadn't experienced before. The rustling of leaves, the occasional snap of a twig, and the distant calls of birds and insects were all I could hear. I made a fire, cooked my simple meal, and lay back on my sleeping bag staring up at the dark canopy of branches and stars peeking through. It was peaceful, but I couldn't shake a strange feeling of being watched. Not by anything supernatural, just a natural instinct, like I wasn't entirely alone. I went to sleep with the fire dying down, trusting the sounds of the forest to keep me alert. Morning came with a fresh, cool breeze and the sun shining through the gaps in the trees. I drank from the stream, ate breakfast, and decided to explore a little upstream. The forest was denser there, with moss-covered rocks and fallen logs creating a quiet maze. I was careful not to leave much trace of my presence. That afternoon, I noticed something odd. There were footprints near the water, large and deep, unlike mine or any animal I knew. They looked human but bigger, heavier, with a rough tread. I didn't see anyone around, and the trail I had come from was clear of other hikers. My heart started to beat faster, but I convinced myself it was probably someone else camping nearby or a lost hunter. Still, I kept my knife close. As evening came, the forest grew darker faster than before. The tall trees blocked more light, and the wind picked up, shaking branches and making the dry leaves dance on the ground. I built another fire, stronger this time, to keep warm and keep any animals at bay. The footprints were on my mind. I checked the area around my camp carefully but found nothing else unusual. Still, a cold knot of worry twisted inside me. That night, just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard it. A slow, heavy crunching sound coming from the bushes a few meters away. It wasn't the light step of a deer or the scurrying of a small animal. This was slow, deliberate, and heavy. I stayed perfectly still, straining to hear more. The sound stopped. I grabbed my flashlight, ready to shine it toward the noise, but my hands shook. After a few long moments, nothing moved. The forest was silent again except for the crackling of the dying fire. I told myself to stay calm. People camp in these woods all the time. Maybe it was a hunter or another camper. But the fact that I hadn't seen anyone else on the trail made me uneasy. I turned off my flashlight and pulled my jacket tighter around me. I forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I woke early, cold and restless. My fire had gone out overnight, and the sky was gray with heavy clouds. I packed quickly, eager to leave but determined to make it back safely. As I folded my tent, I saw more footprints around the site, closer now. They circled my camp, overlapping and crisscrossing, like someone or something had been pacing. I felt the weight of being hunted, but I tried not to panic. I decided to take a different route back, moving away from the stream. The forest seemed darker and thicker. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying strange sounds that made my skin crawl. Branches broke behind me a few times, but when I turned, nothing was there. Hours passed, and the sky grew darker, the clouds heavy with rain. I was soaked through, my boots squelching in the wet ground. My phone had no signal, and the compass I carried kept spinning wildly. I realized I was lost. I tried to stay calm, moving carefully, marking trees with small cuts from my knife, but the forest seemed endless. Then I heard it again, the slow crunching footsteps, steady and heavy, behind me. I didn't run. I knew that would only tire me faster and maybe draw attention. Instead, I kept walking, glancing back just enough to see the shape moving between the trees, always just out of clear view. At one point, I reached a fallen tree and climbed over it, stumbling on the slippery bark. I fell hard, scraping my knee and twisting my ankle. The pain was sharp but bearable. I knew I couldn't stay there. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then started again, closer this time. My mind raced. Who or what was following me? It didn't sound like any animal I knew. I thought about bears, but their steps were heavier and they usually made noise differently. This was something patient, tracking me, waiting. I found a small cave-like opening under some rocks, just big enough to squeeze inside. I crawled in, pressing my back to the cold stone wall, trying to slow my breathing and stay silent. Outside, the footsteps circled slowly, like a predator waiting for its prey. I could hear breathing, low and steady, mingled with the sound of rain starting to fall. I stayed there for what felt like hours, unable to move or even whisper. The rain turned into a steady downpour, washing the forest clean but not washing away the sense of dread. Finally, just before dark, the footsteps retreated. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I crawled out, limping but determined. Using the fading light, I followed the river downstream, hoping it would lead me to a road or a ranger station. By the time I saw the faint glow of headlights in the distance, I was exhausted, soaked, and scared out of my mind. When the car pulled over and a man stepped out, I felt relief so strong it nearly brought me to tears. I told him about the forest, the footsteps, the feeling of being followed. He nodded quietly and said I wasn't the first to have that experience there. He drove me to the nearest town, and the next day I learned from local rangers that a group of men had been camping illegally in those woods. They were known for hunting trespassers or anyone who wandered too close. The footprints I saw and the sounds I heard were not ghosts or monsters. They were humans, dangerous and real. That trip changed me. I never went camping alone again, and I always stayed on marked trails. The forest wasn't just quiet and peaceful. It could hide danger, and sometimes that danger was closer than you thought. The relief of escape stayed with me long after I left the woods, a reminder that some fears are real, and some risks are worth avoiding. I had gone camping alone many times, but that trip felt different from the moment I stepped out of my car. The air was colder than it should have been for late summer, and the forest around me felt strangely empty, like everything inside it was holding its breath. I chose a random spot deep inside the woods, far from the marked trails, because I wanted complete quiet. I wanted to feel cut off from the busy world for a couple of days. I found a small clearing surrounded by tall pines and dry leaves, and the ground there was flat enough for my tent. It looked perfect, and for a while I convinced myself it really was. I set up my tent slowly, making sure the stakes were pushed deep into the soft dirt. I could hear nothing except the soft movements of the trees, a sound that normally calmed me. But that day it felt different. It felt like the forest was watching me settle in. Even when the wind stopped, I kept hearing small noises, like tiny steps on the leaves far away. I told myself it was just squirrels or birds. It usually was. After setting everything up, I walked around to gather firewood. The deeper I went into the trees, the stranger the place felt. Many branches were snapped in half, not small ones but thick ones that usually needed strength to break. I found claw marks on one tree, long and deep, running down the trunk. They didn't look fresh, but they also didn't look old. They made me stop for a moment. I took a photo out of habit, but I felt uncomfortable looking at them, thinking about what kind of animal could leave marks like that. I kept gathering wood, telling myself it didn't matter. Wild animals were normal in the woods. When I returned to camp, the sky was already turning orange. I made a fire, and the warmth helped me relax a bit. I cooked a simple meal and sat there listening to the crackling wood, trying to enjoy the quiet. As night came closer, the cold grew stronger than I expected. I pulled on extra layers and sat inside my tent, but I left the fire burning outside so I could see the glow through the thin fabric. I thought that light would make me feel safe, but after an hour, I started hearing noises again. It began with slow, heavy steps somewhere far behind my tent. They weren't quick or light like the steps of a deer. They were steady, spaced out, and too heavy for a small animal. I felt the cold spread through my body even though I was wearing warm clothes. I sat still, listening, trying to figure out the direction of the sound. The steps stopped for a few minutes. Then I heard the sound of dry leaves being pressed down, this time much closer. I could picture something moving between the trees, something large, but I couldn't see anything from inside my tent. The fire popped loudly outside, and for a moment, everything went quiet again. I wanted to believe that whatever was out there had gone away, but deep down I knew it was still around. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard something new. First, a slow dragging sound, then short snaps from branches being stepped on, then a sound like something breathing hard not too far from me. My mind kept racing, trying to guess what kind of animal came that close to a fire and a tent. Bears usually avoided people if they could. Wolves moved in packs, and I only heard one set of steps. Nothing felt normal about it. Hours passed, and the darkness around me felt thick and heavy. I kept checking the time on my phone, watching the battery slowly drop. Every minute felt long. Around midnight, I heard something even worse. The sound came from the opposite side of my tent, the side where the fire wasn't. It was a slow shuffle, like something was moving its weight from one side to the other. I felt the ground lightly tremble under me. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. I could hear the soft crunch of leaves like something was leaning forward, putting more weight on the ground. I waited for claws or huge paws or anything to hit the tent wall, but nothing touched it. It just stayed there, close enough for me to feel its presence. Eventually, the sound faded again, but I knew it was still nearby. I knew I couldn't stay until morning. I packed my things slowly, trying not to make noise. Every tiny sound I made felt loud in that silent forest. I didn't even bother folding my tent. I just grabbed what I could and stuffed it into my backpack. The fire had burned low, leaving only soft, glowing embers. I kicked dirt over it to put it out fast. I used my flashlight sparingly because I didn't want to draw attention. I walked toward the direction of the road, trying to follow the path I had memorized earlier. The whole forest felt wrong, like something huge could be standing behind any tree. Every sound, every twig cracking, every leaf shifting, made my body tense up. I kept expecting to hear the heavy steps again behind me, but the forest stayed cold and silent. That silence was somehow worse. After walking for almost an hour, I stopped to catch my breath. That was when I heard something in the distance. It was the same heavy step, far but still too close for comfort. I didn't look back. I tightened my backpack straps and walked faster, forcing myself to keep moving even though my legs were shaking. The forest floor felt uneven, and I almost tripped multiple times, but I didn't slow down. I kept imagining something large following the path I was leaving behind. When I finally reached the place where the trees thinned out and I could see the faint shape of the road, I felt the strongest sense of relief I had ever felt in my life. It felt like walking out of a deep, dark tunnel and finally seeing light. My car was parked a short distance away. I almost stumbled running toward it. I unlocked it with shaking hands, threw my backpack inside, and drove off without looking into the woods again. The further I got from that forest, the more normal the world felt. Streetlights, empty roads, even the sound of my car engine felt comforting. When I reached home hours later, I sat in my driveway for a while, thinking about what had happened. I didn't know exactly what was out there, but I knew it wasn't normal wildlife. The heavy steps, the way it circled around my camp, the strange claw marks, the way the forest felt like it was holding something inside it. Everything pointed to something real and dangerous, something that didn't act like the animals I knew. I decided that I wouldn't go camping alone again, at least not deep inside the woods. I still loved nature, but that night changed something in me. It showed me how small I really was compared to the things that lived far from people. The ending of the story is simple and clear. I got out of those woods because I left when I did. If I had stayed even an hour longer, I believe something would have happened to me, something I wouldn't be able to explain or escape from. That night reminded me that the forest doesn't need ghosts or fairy tale creatures to be terrifying. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones that are real, the ones that don't need stories to make them frightening. I survived because I listened to my fear, and now I know better than to ignore it again. I went camping alone in late autumn, choosing a forgotten patch of forest far from any road because I wanted quiet. The air already felt colder than usual when I parked my car at the end of a dirt track and started walking the last stretch toward the small clearing I had marked on my map. The sky was a flat, pale gray, and every breath left a thin cloud in front of me. The ground was covered in dry leaves that crackled under my boots, and each step felt too loud in the silence around me. Even though I had camped alone before, something about this place felt heavier, like the trees were squeezing in closer than they should. By the time I reached the clearing, the day was already sliding toward evening. I set up my tent, placed my pack inside, and collected a pile of fallen branches for a fire. Everything around me felt dead still, like even the wind didn't want to travel through this part of the forest. I tried brushing away the uneasy feeling by keeping myself busy. I made a small fire as the sky dimmed, and soon the clearing glowed with the warm color of the flames. The smell of smoke mixed with the cold air, and for a while I felt okay. But as the night settled, the forest began to change. The trees around me became dark outlines, tall and stiff, their branches barely moving. The forest was strangely quiet, too quiet for that time of year. No insects, no birds, not even the distant rustle of animals moving through the brush. It was as if every living thing had decided to avoid this place. I tried to ignore it, forcing myself to eat something warm before climbing into my tent. The fire burned low but steady outside, and I watched the shadows flicker on the tent walls until my eyes grew heavy. I woke up a few hours later with a strange feeling in my chest, as if something had pulled me out of sleep. My breath felt cold inside the tent, and I could hear the faint crackle of the fire outside. But beneath that, there was something else. A sound too soft and slow to understand at first, like a steady dragging through the leaves far away. It wasn't fast or sharp. It was slow, deliberate, and it moved in long pauses, as if whatever was making it kept stopping to listen. I stayed still on my sleeping bag, barely breathing, trying to figure out if it was an animal. The sound was heavy, not like a small creature or even a deer. It reminded me of something weighty being pulled or carried along the ground. It stopped again, and the silence pressed against my ears. For a moment, I thought I imagined it, but then it started again, a little closer this time. I felt a cold sweat on my back even though the air inside the tent was freezing. I told myself it might be a fallen branch shifting or some kind of old log sliding on the slope of the hill, but the rhythm was too clean, too controlled. I waited, counting my breaths, until the sound faded away. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, I just lay there waiting for something else to happen, and when nothing did, I stared at the faint light of dawn through the tent fabric. When I finally stepped outside, the clearing looked normal, but the ground told a different story. About 20 feet from my tent, near the edge of the trees, the leaves were disturbed in a long, dragged line. The mark curved slightly, then disappeared into dense undergrowth. Whatever made it had been moving slowly, almost cautiously. I crouched down and touched the leaves. They were flattened in a way that didn't match any animal trail I had seen before. It looked like something had been pulled or something heavy had crawled through, following a crooked but purposeful path. The sun barely warmed the air that morning. I kept scanning the trees while boiling water for coffee, feeling like someone was standing just beyond my sight. The forest didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like a presence watching me. I told myself I would pack up after breakfast, but even that felt too slow. Every minute I stayed there tightened something inside me. While I was folding my sleeping bag, I heard another sound from deep in the woods. It was faint but sharp this time, like a single crack of a branch snapping under weight. Not the light snap of a twig, but a thick branch breaking clean. It came from the same direction where the drag trail led. I froze, waiting to hear more, but everything went still again. My heartbeat felt loud enough to shake the air. I didn't bother finishing the rest of the packing neatly. I stuffed everything into my pack and quickly stamped out the fire. As I bent down to grab the last piece of gear, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On the other side of the clearing, at the tree line opposite the drag trail, some of the bark on a trunk had fresh scratches. Not from claws or animals rubbing. These were long, thin marks that cut into the surface at shoulder height, as if something tall had stood there in the night. There were no footprints, no other signs, just those strange marks and the sense that something had been watching from more than one angle while I slept. I didn't stay any longer. I slung the pack over my shoulders and started walking fast toward the direction of my car. The forest felt darker even though the sun was up. I could hear my own footsteps crunching the leaves in sharp, quick bursts, and every few minutes I would stop and listen, trying to catch any sound behind me. Sometimes I thought I did, something muffled, something moving, but it was too distant to be sure. The walk back felt much longer than the journey in. The trees seemed to close in more tightly, and I kept imagining something large moving in the shadows, following slow enough to stay unseen. I didn't run, but I moved fast, feeling a pressure on the back of my neck the entire time, like eyes were glued there. When I finally reached my car, the relief was so strong I almost dropped my pack. I opened the door, threw everything inside, and drove until the forest thinned and the dirt road turned into asphalt again. Even when I reached town, I felt the tension in my hands on the wheel. It wasn't until I finally got home that the tightness in my chest eased. But that night, and for many nights after, I kept thinking about the dragging sound, the marks on the tree, the chosen silence of the forest, and the way everything living had seemed to avoid that place. I never figured out what moved through those woods that night. Maybe it was a large injured animal. Maybe it was someone living off the grid who didn't want anyone near their land. Maybe it was something far more human than I wanted to think about, something that had followed me until dawn and only chose not to step closer. What matters is that I understood the warning. Some places look empty because whatever owns them prefers it that way. And if you stay long enough to hear the first sound in the dark, you might not get a chance to wait for the second. I haven't camped alone since. I decided to go camping alone in a remote forest area I'd never visited before. It was early September. The days were still warm, but the nights promised to be cold. I had packed everything carefully. A tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a first aid kit, a small stove, and a flashlight with extra batteries. I wanted to get away from everything, the noise, the people, the city, and just be by myself for a few days. I wasn't interested in any kind of thrill or adventure, just peace and quiet. The drive there was long but smooth. The forest I chose was deep, surrounded by tall pine trees that blocked most of the sky. When I arrived, the sun was already setting behind the hills, throwing long shadows across the dirt road. I parked my car near a narrow trail, grabbed my gear, and started walking into the woods. The trail was barely visible, covered with fallen leaves and pine needles. As I went deeper, the sounds of birds and insects grew louder, mixed with the occasional rustling of branches. I found a small clearing surrounded by thick trees, flat enough to pitch my tent. The ground was soft but dry, covered with a mix of pine needles and moss. I set up the tent slowly, careful to make sure it was secure. After that, I gathered some dry wood for a fire and prepared a small meal on my stove. The smell of cooking mixed with the fresh pine air. As I ate, I watched the last light fade from the sky, and the stars started to appear, one by one. Night fell quickly. I built a small fire just outside my tent and sat near it, feeling the warmth on my face. The forest was quiet but alive with small sounds. An owl hooting somewhere far away, the wind moving through the branches, the soft snap of twigs under small animals' feet. I checked my flashlight and set it next to me. I wanted to stay awake for a while longer, just to enjoy the silence. Then I heard it, a low, heavy breathing from the trees behind me. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it was too steady and too close. My heart started to race. I looked around, shining my flashlight toward the sound. The beam hit the thick trunks and underbrush, but I saw nothing. The breathing continued, slow and deep, like someone was right there, watching me from the shadows. I didn't move. I didn't want to panic. I reminded myself that it could be an animal, maybe a deer or a bear, but the breathing was too loud, too human-like. I tried to listen for other sounds. There was nothing else, no footsteps, no rustling, just that heavy breathing. I felt trapped in my own fear, frozen between wanting to run and wanting to see what was there. Suddenly, something cracked a branch to my right. I whipped the flashlight in that direction. For a brief moment, I saw a large shape moving quickly through the trees, disappearing into the darkness. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I grabbed my small knife from the tent and stood up, ready to defend myself if needed. The fire was small now, and I threw more wood on it to make it bigger, hoping the light would keep whatever was out there away. I decided to stay near the fire for the rest of the night. The breathing stopped, but I kept hearing faint noises, branches snapping, leaves rustling, but always just beyond the firelight. I didn't dare leave the circle of light. I wrapped my jacket tightly around me, shivering not just from the cold but from the tension in my body. I tried to calm down by telling myself it was probably a wild animal passing by, looking for food or a place to sleep. But the way it watched, the way it moved, felt different, more deliberate. As the night dragged on, I noticed something else. My water bottle was missing. I always kept it close to me, but now it was gone. I checked around the fire, the tent, and the nearby bushes. Nothing. It was as if someone had taken it while I was distracted. That's when I really understood that I was not alone in this forest. Something had been there with me, close enough to touch. I stayed awake until the sky began to lighten. At first, it was just a faint glow, but soon the trees became clearer, and the forest looked less threatening in the daylight. I packed up my things quickly, not stopping to eat breakfast or rest. The air was cool and fresh, but I felt like my skin was crawling from the night's events. I didn't want to take the same path back. Instead, I moved off the trail, heading toward where I thought my car was parked. My legs were tired, but I kept walking, eyes wide open, watching every shadow, every movement. I was afraid that whatever had been there might still be following me. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the outline of my car. Relief washed over me like a wave. I ran the last few steps, threw my bag inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something standing at the edge of the trees. But there was nothing, just the forest, quiet and still. I thought about what had happened all the way home. The breathing, the shadow moving, my missing water bottle. None of it made sense. There was no sign of other people around, and I never heard anything like that before in the wilderness. I realized that it could have been a wild animal, maybe a bear or a large predator, but the breathing was too slow and regular for an animal. What scared me the most was the feeling that someone or something had been watching me closely. Not from far away, but just outside the firelight, waiting, studying. It was a reminder that the forest is not always empty and that some dangers are not obvious until you are right in the middle of them. After that trip, I never camped alone again. I learned to respect the wilderness, not just for its beauty but for its hidden threats. And I never left my water bottle outside my reach. That night was a clear warning. Sometimes the scariest things are not the ones we imagine, but the ones that quietly watch and wait in the dark. I drove up to the mountains on a Friday afternoon because I needed to clear my head. I had been feeling trapped in my daily routine, and camping alone always helped me reset. The spot I chose was far from any official campground, a place I had only been to once before with a friend. Back then it felt peaceful and empty, and I wanted that same quiet again. I parked my car on a dirt pull-off, grabbed my pack, and walked deeper into the woods until the trees grew taller and the noise of the road faded into nothing. The air felt colder than I expected. It wrapped around my clothes and settled on my skin. The ground was soft from the last few days of rain, and every step pressed down into damp soil. I kept moving until I reached a small clearing where fallen logs formed a loose circle. It looked like an old fire spot, but it was mostly covered with moss and dead leaves. I decided to set up my tent there because the trees blocked the wind on all sides. I dropped my pack and set everything up slowly, trying not to rush. I laid out my sleeping bag, packed away my food, checked my flashlight batteries, and then walked around the clearing to get used to the area. I looked for animal tracks, broken branches, anything that might show wildlife had passed through. The forest seemed still. The quiet felt heavy, but in a normal way, the way it usually feels when the sun is low and everything is waiting for night. By the time I finished gathering some dry wood for a small fire, the sun was dipping behind the tree line. The shadows stretched long across the ground, mixing with the deep brown of the wet soil. I sat beside the fire and felt warmth on my face. My legs were sore, but the soft heat felt good. I ate a simple meal and let myself relax. I thought the night was going to be calm. I didn't notice the shift in the woods until after the fire began to fade. A strange stillness settled around me. Normally, even in quiet forests, I can hear something. Bugs, birds settling in, the wind brushing through branches. But suddenly I couldn't hear anything. It didn't feel like silence. It felt like everything was listening to something I couldn't hear. I tried to ignore it because sometimes forests do that. Sometimes sound disappears for no real reason. I added more wood to the fire and tried to focus on the heat, but I kept feeling like something was close. Not supernatural, not imaginary, just the sense that someone or something was out there watching. I looked around every few minutes, letting my eyes follow the tree shapes, trying to figure out if anything moved. Everything stayed still. Later that night, when the fire was almost down to glowing coals, I finally crawled inside my tent. The ground felt harder than I remembered, and the cold pressed up through the thin material under me. I pulled the sleeping bag tight and tried to settle into the darkness. I closed my eyes, but my body stayed tense. I could feel my heartbeat in my chest, slow but heavy. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke to a sound that made the entire tent feel smaller. It wasn't loud. It was the soft crunch of leaves, like someone placing their weight slowly on the ground, trying not to be noticed. I froze. I didn't move a single muscle. I just listened. Another slow crunch came, then another. It felt like something circling the clearing, staying just far enough away that I couldn't tell exactly where it was. I tried to breathe quietly. Every inhale sounded too loud in my own ears. I wanted to look out of the tent, but I didn't want to unzip anything. I knew the sound was real, and I knew it wasn't wind. It had weight behind it. It had rhythm. It moved with purpose. Minutes crawled by. The steps stopped. I waited longer, afraid to move. After what felt like forever, I finally forced myself to sit up. My hands were shaking. I reached for my flashlight and held it close, not turning it on yet. I listened again, but the woods were still silent. I couldn't stay inside the tent knowing something had been that close. I slowly unzipped the door and pointed the flashlight straight out before turning it on. The beam lit up a short tunnel of trees and foggy air. Nothing moved. The clearing looked normal. My fire pit was nothing but faint orange embers. The logs were damp and dark. I stepped out of the tent and looked for footprints, but the ground was too soft and covered with leaves. I felt exposed in the cold air. The darkness between the trees felt thick. I kept the flashlight moving in slow circles, checking everything twice. I didn't see anything, but the feeling of being watched clung to my skin. I stayed outside for almost an hour, my legs getting numb from the cold, trying to convince myself there was nothing there. Eventually, I crawled back inside the tent but left the flashlight in my hand. I didn't fall asleep. I lay awake until the sky started turning pale through the trees. When the daylight finally came, it felt like the forest was letting out a breath. The tension I had felt all night slowly slipped away, but I still wanted to understand what had been moving around my camp. With the sun up, I walked the entire area, searching for anything out of place. I found broken branches on a path behind my tent, snapped clean at human height. The dirt was pressed down in long, uneven stretches, like someone had been walking slowly in circles. I followed it farther back until it disappeared into thicker brush. The feeling that someone had been watching me grew stronger the farther I walked. I kept imagining a person out there in the dark, moving just slow enough to stay silent, stopping every time I stopped, waiting for something. I didn't want to think about what kind of person would roam the woods at night without light and without making a sound. I returned to my campsite with the decision already made. I started packing everything as fast as I could. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. The trees didn't feel peaceful anymore. They felt like walls. The clearing felt like a trap. By the time I slung my pack over my shoulder and walked out, the sun was fully up, but it didn't make me feel any safer. I didn't look back at the spot where I had slept. I just kept walking until I reached my car. When I finally opened the door and sat down, the relief hit me so hard my chest felt lighter. I drove away fast, not caring about the rough road or the bumps. Later, when I got home and tried to explain the feeling to myself, the only thing that made sense was this. Something human had been in those woods with me. Something patient. Something that didn't want to make itself known yet. I didn't see it, but it saw me. I felt it watching, judging distance, maybe waiting for me to fall asleep again. I haven't gone back to that place since. I've camped in other spots, open ones near other people, but never alone that deep again. Every time I close my eyes in a tent now, I think of those slow footsteps circling my camp, and the way the forest went silent, like it knew something was wrong before I did. I still don't know who or what was out there, but I know it was real, and I know it wasn't going to leave unless the sun came up. That night taught me something clear. The woods are not dangerous because of animals or ghosts or anything strange. The scariest thing out there is another person who decides not to be seen. And that thought alone is enough to keep me awake even now. I went camping deep in a place I had never been before. A stretch of forest that looked normal on a map but felt different the moment I stepped into it. I chose this area only because it was farther than the places I usually visited. Far from the usual crowded campsites, far from noise, and far from anyone who might wander by. I wanted peace, but I also wanted to test myself. I wanted to camp alone for 2 full nights without seeing or hearing another person. At the time, it sounded like a simple plan. By the time I walked out of there, I felt stupid for thinking that. The hike in took longer than I expected. The air felt heavy even though the sky stayed clear. Every step seemed to echo through the trees, like the whole forest was holding still and listening to me move. I kept telling myself it was just the way thick woods feel when you go far enough from roads. But even then I could feel something under the surface, like I had crossed an invisible line without meaning to. I kept going anyway. I had already carried my pack too far to turn back. By the time I reached the little flat spot I found on the map, the sun was dropping. The shadows stretched long through the trees, reaching across the ground like thin arms. I set my tent up fast, trying not to think too much about how the air felt colder than it should have been. It wasn't freezing, but it had that strange bite, like when you walk into a basement that hasn't been opened in years. I tried to ignore it. I focused on small things, tightening the tent lines, sorting my food, clearing loose sticks from the ground. The kind of work your hands do when your mind doesn't want to think. The forest got quiet fast. Not normal quiet. It was like everything decided to stop at the same time. No bugs, no birds, no rustling. Just thick silence that felt too heavy for an outdoor place. I kept telling myself animals do this sometimes when something big moves through the area. Maybe a bear, maybe a mountain cat. I tried to make it sound logical in my head, but the quiet didn't fade. It stayed thick and heavy even after the sun slipped behind the trees. When darkness settled fully, it felt like the silence settled with it. I ate a little food and tried to relax, but I kept looking around without meaning to. My eyes kept going back to the tree line, as if something out there was keeping its own eyes on me. I kept thinking I saw small movements, shadows slipping behind trees, shapes shifting in my peripheral vision. But every time I turned fully, there was nothing but trees. Just trees standing still. But the longer I stared, the more I noticed tiny things. Branches that looked bent in strange ways, old marks on the bark that didn't look like scratches from animals, patches of ground with the leaves pushed aside like something had stood there recently. When it got late enough, I forced myself into the tent. I zipped it up, turned off my light, and tried to sleep. At first, the silence made it impossible. My own heartbeat sounded too loud inside my ears. Every time I shifted, the sound of the sleeping bag felt like shouting. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the fabric above me, and my body felt tight, like every muscle refused to relax. Then I heard something. Not loud, not even close. It was soft, almost careful. Slow, steady footsteps in the leaves. One at a time. Not rushing, not wandering, not random. They were spaced apart like whoever or whatever it was placing each step with careful weight. They moved around my campsite in a small arc, then stopped. Just stopped. No wind, no owl, no crunch. I held my breath so hard my chest hurt. I waited for something else, but nothing happened. No movement, no breathing, just silence again, but this time worse than before. I lay there for hours, barely moving. I didn't even check the time. I didn't want to look at my phone because the light might give away that I was awake. My mind kept building pictures of what could be outside. Person? An animal? Something else? I didn't let my imagination go wild, but the idea of someone walking around my tent that far from any trail made my skin crawl. Animals don't move like that. Animals don't take slow, careful steps that go half circle around a tent and then stop. At some point, I drifted into a shallow sleep, the kind where you feel half awake the whole time. When I opened my eyes again, it was early morning. Pale blue light seeped through the tent fabric. The forest outside was quiet again, but not in the same heavy way. Just normal morning quiet. I crawled out slowly, expecting to see something, anything that would explain the night. But there was nothing obvious. Then I looked closer. There were prints in the dirt. Not clear ones, but deep enough to show something heavy had moved through. They weren't shaped like boots, but they also weren't shaped like animal paws. They were just long dents with uneven edges, as if a person had been walking barefoot but dragging their feet slightly at the heel. They circled half the campsite, exactly where I heard the steps. I wanted to pack up and leave right then, but I tried to slow myself down. I told myself maybe it was a hiker who passed by in the night. Maybe someone walking barefoot because their shoes got wet. I tried building any normal excuse in my head. But deep down, I knew no normal hiker would walk through a random spot in the woods at 2 or 3 in the morning without a light. And no normal hiker walks around someone else's tent in a half circle and then just stands still for minutes. I packed fast anyway. I didn't even cook breakfast. I just shoved everything into my bag and headed out. But the forest didn't feel right during the walk back. I kept feeling like something was behind me. Not close, but far enough back that I couldn't see it. Every few minutes I stopped and looked. Each time I did, I saw nothing but the trail stretched behind me and the trees standing silent. But my body kept telling me to move faster. By the time I reached my car, I was sweating even though the air was cool. I threw everything into the back seat and drove without even checking my phone until I reached the main road. When I finally got home, I unpacked and looked at everything in daylight. My tent had small spots on the backside, tiny smudges of dirt about waist-high. Something had touched it from the outside. Not pressed hard, not scratched, just touched. I didn't notice it while packing. I still don't know who or what walked around my tent that night. I don't jump to supernatural answers. I don't think it was some creature or ghost. I think it was a real person. Someone who lived out there or moved through there and didn't want me there. Someone who watched me for a long time in the dark and stood close enough to touch the tent quietly. Someone who moved away before the sun rose so I wouldn't see them. Thinking about that feels worse than anything else I could imagine. I haven't camped alone since. I don't think I will again. Not because I'm scared of the woods, but because I know now that the scariest thing out there isn't animals or ghosts. It's the things that watch you in silence, move like they're used to the dark, and know exactly how close they can get without being seen. And the worst part is knowing they were close enough to touch me through the tent if they wanted to.